Nero Wolfe and the Sommelier's vintage. I was at my desk in the office, typing up the final invoice for the Hendricks affair, a simple matter of embezzlement that had taken Wolfe exactly 48 hours to unravel when the doorbell rang. It was 10:45 on a Wednesday morning in March, which meant Wolfe was upstairs in the plant rooms with Theodore, communing with his 10,000 orchids and ignoring the existence of everything below the roof. Fritz appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, and headed for the front door. Through the office doorway, I watched him check the peephole, a habit so ingrained it was practically religion, before opening up. I heard a woman's voice, cultured and continental, speaking in the kind of English that suggested she'd learned it at finishing school in Switzerland. "I must see Mr. Nero Wolfe immediately. It is a matter of the gravest urgency." Fritz's response was diplomatic, but firm. "Mr. Wolfe is engaged with his orchids until 11 o'clock. If you would care to wait, I will wait." She swept past him, and I do mean swept. The lady who appeared in the doorway of the office was somewhere north of 60, but carried herself like royalty, which, as it turned out, she practically was. Tall, slim, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my annual salary, with iron grey hair pulled back in a chignon and the kind of bone structure that suggested centuries of aristocratic breeding. She wore pearls that looked genuine and a diamond brooch the size of a walnut. I stood. "Archie Goodwin, won't you sit down?" She examined me with pale blue eyes that could have chilled champagne. "You are Mr. Wolfe's assistant? Secretary, investigator, occasional bodyguard, professional nuisance, take your pick." The corner of her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "I am the Countess Helene de Bourbon-Vendôme. I require Mr. Wolfe's services in a matter involving murder, fraud, and $2 million. I gestured to the red leather chair. "That ought to get his attention. Coffee, please." I stepped to the kitchen door and caught Fritz's eye. He was already preparing a tray. The man had radar. When I returned to the office, the Countess was sitting ramrod straight in the chair, her handbag in her lap, staring at nothing in particular, with an expression that suggested she was calculating something unpleasant. Caesar, our largest Doberman, had padded in from the front room where he'd been dozing. He stopped in the doorway, head up, ears forward, assessing the visitor. After a moment, he approached her, sniffed once, and settled onto the floor near Wolfe's desk. The Countess glanced at him, but showed no alarm. "Points for her." "That's Caesar," I said. "Alpha of the pack. You'll meet the others eventually. They're part of the household security. The brownstone has security dogs, 6 of them, 5 Dobermans and a pit bull. They came to us through unusual circumstances and decided to stay. Wolfe didn't object. He appreciates loyalty and intelligence, and they've got both in abundance." Fritz brought the coffee service, proper china, naturally, and poured for both of us. The Countess accepted hers with a slight nod. As Fritz retreated, loyal, our brick-red pit bull with the notched ear and white chest blaze trotted in and took up a position near the door. He sat perfectly still, watching the Countess with intelligent brown eyes. "And that's loyal," I said. "He walked 200 miles to get here. Long story." She studied the dog. "He has kind eyes. Don't let that fool you. He's got a jaw that could crack walnuts, and a sense of territory that would make Genghis Khan jealous. But yes, he's kind, to people who belong here." The Countess sipped her coffee, set the cup down with precision, and said, "I must engage Mr. Wolfe before someone else does." "Someone else?" "Lawrence Pembroke, a pharmaceutical magnate with more money than breeding and a vindictive temperament. He will almost certainly come here today with the same story, different prejudices, and a desire to see me prosecuted for fraud. Why would he want that? Because I sold him 12 bottles of wine for $2 million, and now he believes they are forgeries." I leaned back in my chair and studied her. "Are they?" "No." "Then what's the problem?" "The problem, Mr. Goodwin, is that Gerard Fontaine authenticated them as genuine, then 3 days later recanted and declared them sophisticated fakes. 12 hours after that, he was dead, poisoned with arsenic in his apartment. The police suspect suicide driven by professional disgrace. I know better. Gerard was murdered, and I need Mr. Wolfe to prove both that the wines are authentic and that someone killed Gerard to cast doubt upon them." I pulled over my notebook. "Start from the beginning." She took another sip of coffee, gathering her thoughts. "My family was one of the great wine-producing houses of Burgundy. The de Bourbon-Vendôme estate, produced exceptional vintages from the early 1700s until 1860, when phylloxera destroyed our vines along with most of Europe's. We never recovered. The estate was sold. The chateau eventually collapsed. The family scattered. But the wine remained? A small cache. 12 bottles sealed in a hidden cellar my great-grandfather constructed in 1858, 2 years before the Blight. He was dying and wanted to preserve something for future generations. The location was passed down through family records, cryptic, protected, known only to the eldest child in each generation. I inherited the information 5 years ago when my brother died. Last year I finally had the resources to excavate. And you found the bottles. Intact, perfect storage conditions, constant temperature, absolute darkness, no vibration. The seals were undisturbed. I brought them to New York 3 months ago with full documentation, family records, architectural drawings of the cellar, chemical analysis of the bottles and corks, historical verification of the labels, everything that could establish provenance. And you hired Gerard Fontaine to authenticate them. He was the finest palate in America, perhaps in the world. For 30 years, auction houses, collectors and museums relied upon his judgment. If Gerard declared a wine genuine, it was genuine. If he declared it fraudulent, it was worthless. I was writing this down in my own brand of shorthand. What happened? Gerard examined everything. He spent 3 weeks analyzing the bottles, researching the history, consulting chemical tests. On February 20th, he issued his formal authentication. The wines were genuine pre-phylloxera Burgundy from the de Bourbon-Vendôme estate, dated 1857, and represented an extraordinary historical and oenological treasure. 5 days later, the auction took place. Lawrence Pembroke won the bidding at $2 million. He must really like wine. He likes possessing things other people cannot have. The transaction was completed on February 26th. The wines were transferred to his climate-controlled vault. I was paid. The matter seemed concluded. Until March 1st, when Gerard called me at my hotel in a state of profound agitation. He said he'd made a terrible mistake, that he needed to retract his authentication, that the wines were clever forgeries, using genuinely old bottles and corks but containing wine no more than 50 years old. He refused to explain over the telephone. We arranged to meet the following morning at his apartment. Did you meet? No. That night, Gerard died. Arsenic in his evening brandy. The police found him at 9 o'clock the next morning, when his assistant came to drive him to a consulting appointment. His apartment showed no signs of forced entry. No one saw anything suspicious. The medical examiner ruled it probable suicide. A man disgraced by professional failure taking his own life. But you don't buy it. Her eyes flashed. Gerard Fontaine was constitutionally incapable of suicide. He was proud, yes, and meticulous about his reputation, but he was also fundamentally rational. If he had made an error, he would have corrected it publicly, accepted the consequences, and moved forward. He would not have poisoned himself with arsenic in cowardly privacy. What does Pembroke think? Pembroke is convinced the wines are forgeries, that I defrauded him, and that Gerard was complicit until his conscience overwhelmed him. He has filed suit demanding return of his money and threatening criminal prosecution. His lawyers are vultures. His investigators are everywhere, and he will undoubtedly attempt to hire Mr. Wolfe to prove I am a criminal. I glanced at the clock. 11 o'clock. Right on schedule, the elevator hummed, descended and stopped. Wolfe emerged carrying a spray of phalaenopsis, pink and white, obscenely beautiful in a small vase. He crossed to his desk without acknowledging either of us, set the orchid near the edge where he could admire it and lowered his bulk into his custom-made chair with a satisfied grunt. He looked at the Countess. Madam. She inclined her head. Mr. Wolfe. He rang for Fritz, who appeared immediately with a chilled bottle of beer and a glass on a tray. Wolfe poured carefully, watching the foam rise to exactly the right level, then took a long swallow. Only then did he turn his attention fully to the Countess. Archie? I gave him the condensed version, hitting the main points. When I finished, Wolfe was leaning back in his chair, eyes half closed, fingers interlaced over his middle mound. The wines are in Mr. Pembroke's possession. Yes, the Countess said. You wish me to examine them and render an opinion on their authenticity? I wish you to prove they are genuine and to identify Gerard Fontaine's murderer. The two may not be related. They are related. Gerard authenticated them correctly the first time. Someone convinced or coerced him to recant, then murdered him to prevent him from explaining. If you prove the wine's genuine, you will identify the motive for murder. Wolfe drank more beer. Your fee would be $50,000, $25,000 now as retainer, $25,000 upon successful completion. His eyebrows went up a fraction. Ambitious. The matter is worth $2 million and my family's honor across 3 centuries. I consider $50,000 quite reasonable. Before Wolfe could respond, the doorbell rang. Through the office door I could see Fritz heading for the front hall. Caesar's head came up. Loyal rose silently and moved to a position with a clear view of the entrance. Fritz opened the door, a man's voice, American and aggressive. I'm here to see Nero Wolfe. Now, Mr. Wolfe is engaged. If you would. I don't care if he's having tea with Eleanor Roosevelt. I need to see him immediately. It's about a murder and $2 million of stolen property. The Countess's face went still. Pembroke. I stood. I'll handle it. I stepped into the hall, just as Lawrence Pembroke pushed past Fritz. He was a bull of a man, 6 feet, 200 pounds. Expensive suit stretched across a weightlifter's frame, thinning blonde hair slicked back, pale eyes that looked like they'd been refrigerated. He had the kind of face that suggested he'd spent his life getting what he wanted through volume and intimidation. Mr. Pembroke. I'm Archie Goodwin, Mr. Wolfe's secretary. He's with a client. You'll need to... He saw the Countess through the doorway, and his face flushed purple. You goddamn thief. Mars and Apollo, 2 more of our Dobermans, appeared from the front room where they'd been lounging. They moved to flank me, silent and alert. Mars's hackles were up. Apollo's lips pulled back slightly, showing teeth. Pembroke stopped as if he'd hit a wall. I smiled. The dogs don't care for loud voices or hostile body language. I'd suggest you keep your volume down and your hands where I can see them. He stared at the dogs, then at me. What the hell kind of operation is this? The kind that values civility. You can wait in the front room until Mr. Wolfe is available, or you can leave and make an appointment. Your choice. His jaw worked. For a moment, I thought he might take a swing at me, which would have been entertaining but messy. Then he exhaled hard and nodded. I'll wait. Excellent decision. I showed him to the front room, where Minerva and Diana, the remaining 2 Dobermans, were already positioned. Minerva, our strategist, watched him from near the window. Diana, small and quick, had taken a spot near the door. Pembroke looked at them, looked at me, and sat down hard in one of the chairs. They won't bother you unless you do something stupid, I said. Fritz will bring you coffee. I returned to the office. Wolfe was regarding the Countess with his version of curiosity, which meant his eyes were fully open, and he was paying attention. Mr. Pembroke has arrived, I said. He's cooling his heels in the front room with 4 of our dogs as chaperones. Vulgar man, the Countess murmured. Wolfe grunted. Nevertheless, he represents the other side of this affair. I should hear him before making any commitments. He looked at her. You will wait. I will wait. Archie, show Mr. Pembroke in. Countess, if you would retire to the front room temporarily. She rose with dignity and swept out, her posture suggesting she was exiting a stage after a particularly triumphant performance. I went to collect Pembroke, who looked like he'd been stewing in his own bile. Mr. Wolfe will see you now. He stalked past me into the office. Caesar's eyes tracked him. Loyal remained utterly still. Pembroke sat down in the red leather chair, still warm from the Countess, and glared at Wolfe. I need you to prove that woman is a fraud and a thief. Wolfe's expression didn't change. Good morning, Mr. Pembroke. Would you care for coffee? I don't want coffee. I want my $2 million back. I am not a collection agency. If you wish to tell me your story, I will listen. If you wish to rant, please do so elsewhere. Archie has considerable physical competence and can assist you to the door. Pembroke's face did that purple thing again. Then he visibly reined himself in. Fine. I'll tell you the story. I collect rare wines. Have for 30 years. Last month I had the opportunity to acquire 12 bottles of pre-phylloxera Burgundy, authenticated by Gerard Fontaine, the best sommelier in the business. I paid $2 million. 3 days later, Fontaine recanted and said they were fakes. Then he killed himself out of shame. That woman sold me forgeries, and I want her prosecuted. You examined the wines before purchasing them? Fontaine examined them. That's what I paid him for. His authentication was ironclad. Documentation, chemical analysis, tasting notes, the works. Then he called me and said he'd made a mistake, that someone had fooled him with genuinely old bottles and corks but modern wine. He was going to issue a formal retraction. That night he died. You believe he committed suicide? The police say so. Arsenic in his brandy. No forced entry. What else could it be? Several things. Murder dressed as suicide, for instance. Pembroke waved that away. Why would anyone murder him? The man was a wine expert, not a mob informant. Perhaps someone wished to prevent him from explaining his retraction. Or maybe he couldn't live with the humiliation of being duped by some titled con artist. Pembroke leaned forward. Look, Wolfe, this is simple. That woman forged a bunch of documents, planted fake bottles in France somewhere, and hired an actress to play aristocrat. Fontaine figured it out too late. I want you to prove it so I can get my money back and see her deported. Wolfe drank beer. Your retainer? 50,000. 25 now. 25 when you deliver evidence I can use in court. I kept my face neutral, but mentally I was grinning. The same fee from both sides. This was going to be interesting. Wolfe set down his glass. Mr. Pembroke, I will consider your request. However, I must inform you that the Countess de Bourbon-Vendôme has also engaged my services with an identical retainer to prove precisely the opposite, that the wines are genuine and that Mr. Fontaine was murdered to cast doubt upon them. Pembroke's face went from purple to something approaching eggplant. You're kidding. I do not kid. I am faced with two clients, two contradictory objectives, and one truth. The situation is intellectually intriguing. Then take my side. First come, first served. The Countess arrived first. You merely arrived louder. I'll double it. 100,000. Wolfe's eyes gleamed briefly. Greed and amusement mixed. Tempting. But no, I will accept both retainers with the following terms. I will investigate Mr. Fontaine's death and the authenticity of the wines. I will determine the truth, not what either of you wishes to hear, but what actually occurred. If the wines are genuine and the Countess is vindicated, she will receive her money's worth. If the wines are fraudulent and you have been swindled, you will receive yours. If the truth lies elsewhere, you will both receive an explanation worth $50,000. Agreed? Pembroke looked like he'd bitten into something rotten. And if I refuse, then I will accept only the Countess's retainer and pursue the matter from her perspective exclusively. Your choice is between having a voice in the investigation or having none. Silence. Pembroke's jaw worked. Finally, fine, but I want daily reports. You will receive information when I have information worth sharing, not before. Jesus Christ, you're as arrogant as they say. I prefer confident. Archie, show Mr. Pembroke out and retrieve the Countess. We have work to do. I escorted Pembroke to the front door. He left without another word, though his body language suggested he wanted to kick something. I returned to the office, collected the Countess from the front room where she'd been sitting with perfect composure while Diana watched her with interest and brought her back to the red leather chair. Wolfe looked at both of them, the Countess in person, Pembroke's departure still hanging in the air like cigar smoke. I have accepted both your retainers under the terms I outlined to Mr. Pembroke. You will each provide me with complete documentation, access to the wines, and truthful answers to all questions. I will provide you with the truth. Are we in agreement? The Countess nodded. Yes. Excellent. Archie will require your checks, all relevant documents, and a list of everyone connected to this affair. You will make yourselves available for further questions as needed. Now, if you'll excuse me, it is nearly lunchtime, and Fritz is preparing breaded veal cutlets. Good day. He picked up his current book, something about Byzantine mosaics, and began reading. The interview was over. I walked the Countess to the door. She paused on the stoop, looking back at the brownstone, with its bulletproof windows glinting in the late morning sun. Your employer is an unusual man, Mr. Goodwin. That's the politest way anyone's ever put it. Do you believe he can determine the truth? Lady, if anyone can figure out whether 12 bottles of wine are real or fake and who killed your sommelier, it's the man sitting in that office drinking beer and ignoring both of us. He'll do it without leaving his chair. He'll do it in a way that makes everyone else look stupid, and he'll do it because it's a puzzle that interests him. The money's just how we keep score. She smiled, a real smile this time, not the diplomatic version. Then I shall await his verdict with interest. She descended the steps and walked toward 10th Avenue, where a taxi was idling. I watched her go, then returned to the office. Wolfe was still reading, but I knew he was aware of me. 2 clients, same case, opposite goals, I said. This ought to be fun. It will be instructive, he said without looking up. Truth has no allegiance to either party. It simply is. Our task is to uncover it. And if both clients hate the answer, then we will have earned our fee twice over. He turned a page. Call Saul. I want him to investigate Mr. Fontaine's apartment, his financial records, and his professional relationships. Call Lon Cohen at the Gazette. I want everything the newspapers have on this affair. And contact Dr. Vollmer. I will need his expertise regarding arsenic poisoning. What about the wines themselves? Tomorrow, I wish to review the documentation first and formulate questions. For now, we gather information. He glanced up briefly. This promises to be complex, Archie. Someone killed a man whose gift was taste, whose currency was reputation, whose weapon was truth. That suggests a killer of unusual sophistication. Or unusual desperation. Perhaps both. He returned to his book. Now go away. I'm reading. I went. After lunch, Fritz's veal cutlets were everything they should have been, and Wolfe consumed 3 of them with evident satisfaction. I spent the afternoon working the telephone while Wolfe retreated to his desk with the documentation both clients had provided. The Countess had been thorough. Her packet included family genealogical records dating back to 1690, architectural drawings of the original de Bourbon Vendôme estate with the hidden cellar marked, photographs of the excavation showing the 12 bottles in situ before removal, chemical analysis reports from a French laboratory examining the glass composition and cork material, and Gerard Fontaine's original 30-page authentication document, complete with detailed tasting notes. Pembroke's packet was thinner but more aggressive. The auction house's sales contract, his own expert's preliminary analysis, inconclusive, copies of Fontaine's telephone messages to Pembroke, stating his retraction, and a legal brief from Pembroke's attorneys outlining potential fraud charges against the Countess. There was also a copy of the police report on Fontaine's death, suicide by arsenic poisoning, case closed pending final toxicology. I got Saul Panzer on the line first. Saul is the best operative in New York, possibly in the country, a small, unassuming man with a forgettable face and a brain like a Swiss watch. If you need information gathered quietly, thoroughly, and without fuss, Saul's your man. Saul? Archie. We've got a complicated one. My favorite kind. What do you need? I gave him the basics. Fontaine's apartment, his office, his financial records for the past 6 months, who he saw, who he talked to, who paid him, who threatened him, also his professional reputation, any recent mistakes, controversies, jealousies. Someone either convinced him to lie or scared him into retracting a correct authentication. I need to know which. When do you need this? Yesterday. I'll have something by tomorrow afternoon. The apartment might be tricky if the police have it sealed. It's ruled suicide. They won't be guarding it closely. Just don't leave fingerprints. Archie, please. I'm insulted. You're efficient. There's a difference. I hung up and dialed Lon Cohen at the Gazette. Lon and I have an arrangement. I feed him stories when we've got something newsworthy and solved, and he feeds me background when we need it. It's a symbiotic relationship, like those birds that clean crocodiles' teeth. Goodwin, let me guess, you want everything we've got on the Fontaine suicide. Not a suicide. The police say suicide. The police are frequently wrong. What have you got? I heard papers rustling. Gerard Fontaine, age 64, born in Lyon, emigrated to New York in spent 30 years building a reputation as the finest wine authenticator in America. Worked for auction houses, private collectors, museums, never made a documented error. Last month he authenticated 12 bottles of pre-phylloxera Burgundy for $2 million. 3 days later he recanted, claimed they were forgeries, and died that night. Arsenic in his evening brandy, no signs of struggle, no forced entry. Medical examiner called it suicide, driven by professional disgrace. What did the papers say about him personally? Meticulous, obsessive about detail, proud of his reputation. Never married, no close family. Lived alone in a rent-controlled apartment in the West Village. Same place for 25 years. Had an assistant, a young woman named Claire Daubigny, who discovered the body. She's French, worked with him for 5 years, handled scheduling and correspondence. Anyone else close to him? Professional circle only. He was friendly with other authenticators, auction house directors, wine importers, not exactly a social butterfly. His life was wine. What about enemies? In his line of work? Sure. Dealers whose fakes he exposed, collectors whose prizes he devalued, rivals who resented his reputation, but nothing that would lead to murder. He was a wine expert, not a mob accountant. Someone thought he was worth killing, or he realized he'd made a catastrophic mistake and couldn't live with it. Lon, this guy spent 30 years being right. Why would one error drive him to suicide? Maybe because it was a $2 million error involving the rarest wines in existence? That's not misidentifying a bottle of Chianti, Archie. That's professional annihilation. Or maybe someone wanted him annihilated. If you're going to hand me a murder story, make it a good one. When have I ever disappointed you? The Hendricks embezzlement. You solved it in 48 hours. That barely made page 6. This one will make page 1. Give me a few days. I'm counting on it. He paused. Archie, be careful. If Fontaine really was murdered, whoever did it was sophisticated enough to make it look like suicide and fool the police. That's not an amateur. Noted. Send me everything you've got. Articles, obituaries, gossip columns, the works. It'll be on your desk tomorrow morning. I hung up and looked at Wolfe, who was reading Fontaine's authentication document, with the expression he reserves for particularly interesting orchid catalogues. Saul's on it. Lon sending files. Dr. Vollmer next. He didn't look up. I dialed Vollmer's office. Doc Vollmer is our go-to medical consultant, a general practitioner with a brain the size of a cantaloupe and a willingness to answer hypothetical questions without asking why we're asking. He's patched me up a few times after encounters that ended with furniture breakage and bruised knuckles. Doc, Archie Goodwin. Quick question about arsenic poisoning. Good afternoon, Archie. How much arsenic, what form, and who's dead? Enough to kill a 64-year-old man in good health. Probably in brandy. Ruled suicide. Arsenic trioxide is the usual form. Tasteless, odorless in solution. Symptoms begin within 30 minutes. Nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, then cardiovascular collapse and death within a few hours. Painful, unpleasant, and slow enough that the victim would have time to call for help if they changed their mind. Would you choose arsenic for suicide? Absolutely not. There are a dozen easier methods. Barbiturates, carbon monoxide, firearms. Arsenic is medieval, agonizing, and unreliable. It's a poisoner's weapon, not a suicide's choice. That's what I thought. Which means your victim was murdered. That's what we're trying to prove. Thanks, Doc. Bill will be in the mail. I added Vollmer's information to my notes and looked up. Wolfe had finished Fontaine's authentication document and was sitting with his eyes closed, fingers interlaced, motionless. This meant his brain was working at maximum capacity, sorting through facts, identifying patterns, formulating questions. I knew better than to interrupt. Instead, I called Fontaine's assistant, Claire Daubigny, and arranged for her to come to the brownstone the following morning at 11, after Wolfe's sacred orchid time. Then I pulled out the files Lon had sent over by messenger and started reading. Gerard Fontaine's career was impressive. 3 decades of authentication work without a single documented error. He'd exposed forgeries that had fooled other experts, identified rare vintages from microscopic details, and built a reputation so solid that his word could make or destroy a bottle's value. He'd worked with every major auction house, consulted for museums, and advised collectors from New York to Hong Kong. His personal life was sparse. No family, few friends, no romantic entanglements mentioned in any article. His apartment in the West Village was modest, rent-controlled, 2 rooms, filled with wine books and reference materials. His income was substantial, but not extravagant. He lived for his work. The obituaries were respectful but puzzled. No one could quite believe that Gerard Fontaine, meticulous, proud, rational, would kill himself over a professional error. Several colleagues were quoted expressing doubt about the suicide verdict. Claire Daubigny was mentioned only briefly. Devastated by the loss of her mentor and employer, at 4 o'clock, Wolfe's eyes opened. Archie, yeah? Tomorrow you will visit Mr. Fontaine's apartment. I want a complete examination of his living space, his reference library, his correspondence. Look for anything, notes, receipts, telephone messages, relating to the Daubon Vendôme wines. The police have been through it. The police were looking for evidence of suicide. You will be looking for evidence of murder. There is a difference. What am I looking for specifically? I don't know. You'll recognize it when you find it. That's helpful. You're observant, intelligent, and thorough. Use those attributes. He glanced at the clock. It's time for the plant rooms. Tomorrow we will also interview Miss Daubigny, and I will examine the wines themselves. Mr. Pembroke will provide access. He won't like it. He wants my services. He will tolerate my methods. Wolfe stood, a process that involved considerable mass relocating itself vertically. This case has an unusual flavor, Archie. Mr. Fontaine was killed not for what he knew, but for what he might say. That suggests the truth itself is dangerous. To whom? Excellent question. Find the answer and we'll have our murderer. He headed for the elevator. I watched him go, then returned to my desk. Through the office doorway I could see into the front room, where 4 of our dogs were arranged in their usual evening positions, Caesar near the window with a view of the street, Mars by the hallway, Apollo and Diana flanking the entrance. Minerva had followed Wolfe upstairs to the plant rooms, a habit she'd developed recently. Loyal was in the kitchen with Fritz, probably hoping for dinner scraps. The phone rang. I picked up. Nero Wolfe's office. Archie Goodwin speaking. Mr. Goodwin, this is Claire Daubigny. French accent, younger voice, stressed. You called about an appointment tomorrow? That's right. 11 o'clock. We need to ask you some questions about Mr. Fontaine. I've already spoken to the police. We're not the police. We're investigating his death from a different angle. Silence. Then, you don't believe it was suicide. We're exploring alternatives. Will you help us? Another pause. Yes, I'll be there tomorrow. But Mr. Goodwin, there's something you should know. What's that? Gerard didn't kill himself. I knew him for 5 years. He was incapable of it. Someone murdered him, and whoever did it is still out there. Be careful. Thanks for the warning. I'm not warning you for your sake. I'm warning you because Gerard deserves justice, and I don't want his killers to claim any more victims. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there for a moment, staring at the phone. This case was getting more interesting by the hour. At 6:30, Wolfe descended from the plant rooms and we reconvened in the office for the evening routine. Beer for him, brandy for me. Comfortable silence broken occasionally by observations about the case. Fritz had prepared lamb chops with rosemary and garlic, roasted potatoes, and asparagus with hollandaise. We ate in the dining room while Caesar and Loyal held positions nearby, watchful but unobtrusive. Over coffee, Wolfe said, "Tomorrow will be instructive. Miss Daubigny will provide insight into Mr. Fontaine's state of mind. You will examine his apartment for evidence the police missed, and I will taste the wines myself. You hate wine. I dislike wine that pretends to be more than fermented grape juice. These bottles, if genuine, represent history, craft, and botanical rarity that I can respect. And if they're fake, then someone has gone to extraordinary lengths to deceive experts, which suggests the deception itself is worth more than the sale price. That is also interesting. You think this is about more than $2 million. I think a man was murdered to prevent him from speaking. That suggests the truth he planned to reveal would have consequences beyond financial. What those consequences might be, I cannot yet say. He finished his coffee and stood. I'm going to read. Don't disturb me unless someone shoots through the bulletproof windows or the brownstone catches fire. What if Inspector Kramer shows up? Especially not then. He retired to his room. I stayed in the office, reviewing files and making notes. Around 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Through the front window, I could see Inspector Kramer's stocky silhouette on the stoop, his unlit cigar jutting from his jaw like a accusatory finger. I went to the door. Caesar was already there, ears forward but relaxed. He knew Kramer by now, had known him for years actually, since the 5 Dobermans had arrived. Kramer had been present for enough of our cases that the dogs recognized him as a grudging ally rather than a threat. I opened up. Inspector, what a pleasant surprise. Can it? Goodwin. I want to talk to Wolfe. He's reading. He hates being disturbed. I don't care if he's composing a symphony. I heard through the grapevine that he's been hired to investigate the Fontaine suicide, and I'm here to tell him to stay out of it. It's not a suicide. The medical examiner says it is. The medical examiner is wrong. Kramer's jaw tightened. Based on what? Based on the fact that Gerard Fontaine spent 30 years being meticulous and rational, and arsenic poisoning is neither meticulous nor rational as a suicide method. based on the fact that he was about to explain why he'd retracted a $2 million authentication, which suggests someone wanted him silent permanently, or he couldn't face the humiliation and took the coward's way out. You don't believe that any more than I do. He glared at me, then pushed past into the hall. Mars and Apollo appeared from the front room, flanking him silently. Kramer glanced at them, grunted acknowledgement, and continued to the office. He knew better than to make sudden movements around our dogs. I followed him in. He stood in the middle of the room, hands in his coat pockets, looking like a man who'd been chewing on something unpleasant for hours. "Where's Wolfe?" "Reading. I told you. Get him." "Inspector, you know the rules. Disturb him after dinner, and he'll refuse to cooperate on principle. Come back tomorrow morning after 11. I'm not leaving until I talk to him. Then you're going to be standing there a long time." We stared at each other. Caesar had settled near Wolfe's desk, watching with interest. Loyal padded in from the kitchen and took up his position near the door. Kramer looked at them, then at me. "Your boss is investigating a closed case. Your case is closed prematurely. The evidence says suicide. The evidence says someone staged a suicide. There's a difference." He pulled out his cigar, looked at it, put it back. "What's Wolfe's interest?" "Two clients. The Countess de Bourbon-Vendôme wants us to prove the wines are genuine, and Fontaine was murdered. Lawrence Pembroke wants us to prove the wines are fake, and the Countess is a fraud. We're looking for the truth, which may not please either of them." "That's the dumbest arrangement I've ever heard." "That's because you're thinking like a cop. Wolfe's thinking like a detective. The truth doesn't care about client preferences." Kramer chewed on that. Literally chewed, his jaw working as if the concept tasted bad. "Finally, if he finds evidence of murder, he brings it to me, immediately. No grandstanding, no dramatic revelations in his office, no making me look like an idiot in front of reporters. Can't promise that last part. You've got a talent for looking foolish without our help." "Goodwin, relax, Inspector. If we find proof of murder, you'll get it. Wolfe likes solving crimes, not obstructing justice. You know that." He did know it, which was why he was here complaining instead of threatening arrest. Kramer and Wolfe had a complicated relationship, mutual respect wrapped in mutual irritation, with neither one willing to admit they actually liked working together. "Fine, but I'm warning you, Goodwin. If this turns into one of Wolfe's theatrical productions where he gathers all the suspects and points fingers, I'm going to arrest him for obstruction. You've been threatening that for 20 years. How's it working out?" He turned and stalked toward the door. Caesar watched him go, tail thumping once against the floor, which for Caesar qualified as warm affection. Kramer paused, looked back. Fontaine was a good man. If someone murdered him, I want the bastard caught. "Then we're on the same side, Inspector. Try not to get in our way." He left. I locked the door behind him, checked the security buzzers operational, dogs settled, brownstone secure, and returned to the office. The files were still spread across my desk, Fontaine's authentication document on top. I picked it up and read through his tasting notes again. His descriptions were precise, almost poetic. Color of aged mahogany, brilliant clarity, no sediment. Nose complex, dried cherry, leather, forest floor, hint of anise. Palate reveals extraordinary depth, fruit perfectly integrated with tannins, now resolved to silk, minerality suggesting limestone terroir, finish extending 90 seconds with evolving notes of tobacco and dark chocolate. This is Burgundy at its apex, a wine that has transcended mere beverage to become historical artifact. 30 pages of this kind of analysis. Chemical tests confirming the age of glass and cork. Provenance documentation, verified through archives in France. Photographs of the bottles in the hidden cellar, seals intact. And then, 3 days after issuing this report, Fontaine had called both his clients and said he'd been wrong, that the wines were clever forgeries, that he needed to retract everything. What had he discovered? Or what had someone made him believe he'd discovered? I made a note to ask Claire Daubigny about Fontaine's movements during those 3 days between authentication and retraction. Someone had gotten to him, through evidence, through threats, through deception. Find out how, and we'd find out who. I locked the files in the safe, turned off the lights, and headed upstairs. Tomorrow was going to be a long day. From Wolfe's room, I could hear the faint sound of pages turning. He was still reading, his mind probably working through the case, even as his eyes followed Byzantine mosaics across centuries. The man never stopped thinking. It was his greatest strength and his most exhausting quality. I went to bed hoping the dogs wouldn't decide to investigate any suspicious noises in the middle of the night. Caesar had a tendency to pace when something bothered him, and his 80-pound frame made the floorboards creak like a haunted house. But the night was quiet. The brownstone was secure, and somewhere in Manhattan, Gerard Fontaine's killer was either sleeping peacefully or lying awake wondering if Nero Wolfe would prove to be a problem. I knew which one I'd bet on. The next morning, Thursday, March 9th, I was up at 7, through breakfast by 8, and at my desk by 8:30 going through the additional files Lon Cohen had messengered over. More details about Fontaine's career, his professional relationships, his few public controversies. Nothing that suggested murder, but plenty that suggested a man who valued precision above all else. At 9 o'clock, while Wolfe was still upstairs with his orchids, the phone rang. I picked up. Nero Wolfe's office. "Mr. Goodwin, this is Lawrence Pembroke." His voice had the tight quality of a man who'd spent the night fuming. "I want to know what progress Wolfe has made." "It's been less than 24 hours, Mr. Pembroke. We're gathering information. I'm paying $50,000. I expect results." "You'll get results when there are results to get. We're interviewing witnesses today and examining the wines. If you'd like to supervise personally, you're welcome to stand in the corner and keep quiet while we work." "Don't get smart with me, Goodwin. It's a natural talent. I can't help it." He hung up. I grinned and made a note. Pembroke getting impatient, probably feeling buyer's remorse about the whole arrangement. At 9:30, Saul Panzer called. "Archie, I've got preliminary information on Fontaine." That was fast. "It's what you pay me for." Fontaine's apartment is still unsealed. Police aren't guarding it because they've closed the case. I got inside this morning. Place is exactly what you'd expect. Books everywhere, tasting notes filed meticulously, correspondence organized by date. The man was obsessive about record keeping. Find anything interesting? 2 things. First, his appointment calendar shows a meeting on March 1st at 10 p.m., the night he died, with someone identified only as AV, no other details. Second, his bank records show a deposit of $50,000 on February 15th, 5 days before he issued his authentication of the de Bourbon Vendôme wines. I sat up straighter. Who paid him? That's the interesting part. The payment came through an escrow account, controlled by the auction house, that brokered the sale. Standard procedure for high-value authentication work. But here's what's odd. There's another deposit of $25,000 on February 28th, the day before he died, from a different source, cash deposit. No record of who provided it. $25,000 in cash, delivered to his bank in person. The teller's notes say Fontaine himself made the deposit, but there's no documentation of where the money came from. Payment for changing his mind, or payment to keep quiet about something. Either way, it's suspicious. What about his personal life? Friends, enemies, romantic interests? Almost non-existent. His assistant, Claire Daubigny, is really the only person he saw regularly outside of work. A few professional colleagues, but no one close. The man lived like a monk: work, wine, sleep, repeat. Anything else? His trash had been gone through before I got there. Not by the police, they wouldn't have been that careful. Someone went through his apartment looking for something after he died, probably within hours of the body being removed. They were neat about it, but I can tell when a space has been searched. Looking for what? I don't know. But whatever Fontaine knew that got him killed, someone wanted to make sure he didn't leave evidence behind. I made detailed notes. Good work, Saul. Keep digging. I want everything: who he talked to in the week before he died, any unusual phone calls, anyone who visited the apartment. I'm on it. After Saul hung up, I sat back and thought about the timeline. Fontaine gets paid $50,000 to authenticate the wines, standard professional fee. He spends 3 weeks examining them and issues his report on February 20th. Wines are genuine. 5 days later, February 26th, the auction happens. Pembroke pays $2 million. So far, so normal. But then, on February 28th, 2 days after the sale, Fontaine receives $25,000 in cash from an unknown source. The next day, March 1st, he calls both clients and says he's made a terrible mistake. The wines are forgeries. He makes an appointment with someone identified as AV for 10 p.m. that same night. And sometime before dawn on March 2nd, he dies of arsenic poisoning. The pattern was clear. Someone paid Fontaine $25,000 to recount his authentication. When he kept his appointment with AV, possibly to explain, Possibly to return the money, possibly to identify who'd paid him. He was murdered. But why? If the wines were genuine, who benefited from casting doubt on them? If they were fake, who benefited from Fontaine's death instead of his retraction? At 10:30, Fritz appeared in the doorway. "Archie, Miss Daubigny has arrived." I glanced at the clock. She was half an hour early, which suggested either anxiety or eagerness. I went to the front hall. Claire Daubigny was younger than I'd expected, maybe 30, slim and dark-haired, dressed in a simple black suit that suggested mourning without being theatrical about it. She had the kind of face that would be pretty if it weren't currently hollowed out by grief and exhaustion, dark circles under her eyes, tight lines around her mouth, skin pale as paper. Caesar had come to investigate. He approached her calmly, sniffed once, and settled nearby. His acceptance seemed to relax her slightly. "Miss Daubigny, I'm Archie Goodwin. You're early." I couldn't sleep. French accent, but her English was excellent. "I've been awake since 4 a.m. thinking about Gerard. Would you like coffee?" "Please." I showed her to the front room rather than the office. Wolfe wouldn't be down until 11, and I wanted her comfortable. Diana and Minerva were already there, lounging near the windows. Diana's ears pricked up when we entered, but she didn't move. "The dogs won't bother you," I said. "They're part of the household. They're beautiful." She sat carefully on the edge of the sofa. Gerard would have appreciated them. He valued loyalty and intelligence. Fritz brought coffee, his good china, which meant he'd assessed her as genuine rather than putting on airs. She accepted it with a nod of thanks and held the cup in both hands as if warming herself. I sat across from her. "You said on the phone that you don't believe Gerard committed suicide." "I know he didn't." Her voice was firm despite the exhaustion. "I worked with him for 5 years. I knew his moods, his patterns, his way of thinking. He was proud, yes, and he cared deeply about his reputation. But he was also rational. If he'd made an error, he would have corrected it publicly, explained how it happened, and accepted the consequences. He would never have poisoned himself in secret like a coward. The police think professional disgrace drove him to it. The police didn't know him. I did." She set down the coffee cup with a hand that trembled slightly. "Gerard was murdered, Mr. Goodwin. I'm certain of it. And I think I know why. That got my attention." "Why?" "Because he discovered something about those wines that someone didn't want revealed. Not that they were forgeries. I don't believe they are. But something else. Something that made them dangerous to possess." "What?" "I don't know. He wouldn't tell me. But in the 3 days between the auction and his death, he was agitated, nervous. He kept rereading his authentication notes, cross-checking references, making phone calls. He was trying to verify something." "Did he say what?" "No, but on February 28th, someone came to his apartment with cash. A lot of it. I wasn't there, but Gerard told me about it the next morning. He said someone had paid him to recant his authentication, to publicly declare the wines forgeries." "Did he say who?" "No. He said it was better if I didn't know. He said he was going to return the money and expose whoever had tried to bribe him." She looked at me directly, her dark eyes intense. "That night he died. Coincidence? Not likely." "What about the appointment with AV at 10 p.m.? She blinked. "How did you know about that?" "We have our methods. Who is AV?" "I don't know. The appointment wasn't in his regular calendar. He must have added it separately. Could it be the person who paid him? Perhaps. Or someone he trusted to discuss the situation with." Gerard was very careful about who he confided in. "Did he confide in you?" "Sometimes, but not about this." "Whatever he'd discovered frightened him, Mr. Goodwin." Gerard wasn't easy to frighten. I made notes while she sipped her coffee. At exactly 11 o'clock, the elevator hummed and descended. Wolfe emerged carrying a spray of Miltania, reddish-purple with yellow markings, and crossed to his desk without acknowledging either of us. His morning ritual was sacred and not to be interrupted by trifles like witnesses. He settled into his chair, rang for beer, and only then looked at Claire Daubigny. "Miss Daubigny, thank you for coming." She stood, instinctively responding to his formal presence. "Mr. Wolfe, please sit. Archie has been questioning you." "Yes." "Good. He is competent at extraction. I prefer synthesis." Fritz appeared with beer, poured it precisely, and withdrew. Wolfe drank, then focused on her with his version of full attention. Eyes open, expression neutral, but intensity radiating from him like heat from a stove. You worked with Mr. Fontaine for 5 years. You knew his methods, his standards, his professional approach. In your judgment, was his authentication of the de Bourbon Vendôme wines correct or incorrect? She didn't hesitate. Correct. Gerard was meticulous. He would not have issued that authentication without being absolutely certain. Yet he recanted, under duress. Someone either deceived him with false evidence or threatened him into lying. Which? I don't know. He wouldn't tell me. But you have an opinion. She paused, considering. Gerard was not susceptible to threats. He'd faced them before. Dealers whose forgeries he'd exposed, collectors whose prizes he'd devalued. He never bent. So I believe someone presented him with evidence that appeared to contradict his original analysis. Evidence convincing enough that he felt obligated to retract. What evidence could possibly overturn 3 weeks of examination? I don't know. That's what frightens me. Gerard was too thorough to be easily deceived. Whatever was shown to him must have been extraordinarily sophisticated. Wolfe leaned back. Or extraordinarily simple. Sometimes the most effective deceptions are those that exploit our assumptions rather than our ignorance. He paused. Tell me about the $25,000. She looked at me, then back at Wolfe. You know about that? We know many things, Miss Daubeny. We are attempting to understand them. Who paid him? I don't know. Gerard wouldn't say. He received the money on February 28th cash, delivered in person. He was agitated about it. He said someone was trying to buy his silence, or his dishonesty, and that he intended to refuse. But he took the money. He took it because he wanted to identify who was behind it. He thought if he pretended to accept, he might learn more about what was really happening. Did he? I don't know. He died before he could tell me. Wolfe drank more beer, his expression thoughtful. Miss Daubeny, in your 5 years working with Mr. Fontaine, did he ever make an error in authentication? No, never. Not once? Not once. Gerard's record was perfect. That's why this situation makes no sense. Either his original authentication was correct and he was forced to lie, or someone showed him evidence that overturned 30 years of professional judgment. Neither explanation is satisfactory. Unless, Wolfe said slowly, the wines are both genuine and fraudulent simultaneously. A logical impossibility, which suggests we are asking the wrong question. I looked at him. What's the right question? I don't yet know, but I intend to find out. He turned back to Claire. One more question. After Mr. Fontaine's death, was his apartment searched by anyone other than the police? Her eyes widened slightly. How did you? Yes, I went there the day after Gerard died to collect some personal items. The apartment had been disturbed. Not obviously, but Gerard was obsessively neat. Things were slightly out of place, file drawers not quite closed, books not aligned properly. Someone had gone through everything, looking for what? I assume his authentication notes, documentation of the wines, perhaps evidence of who paid him. Did you find anything? No. The police had already taken his professional files. Whatever the searcher was looking for, either they found it, or it had already been removed. Wolfe nodded slowly. Thank you, Miss Daubeny. You have been helpful. If we require additional information, Archie will contact you. She stood. Mr. Wolfe, please find who killed Gerard. He deserves justice. Justice is a byproduct of truth, Miss Daubeny. We pursue the latter. If the former follows, so much the better. She left, escorted by me to the front door. As she descended the stoop, I noticed a dark sedan parked across the street with 2 men inside, both watching the brownstone. They didn't move when Claire appeared, which meant they weren't following her. They were watching us. I went back inside and found Wolfe frowning at his orchid. We've got watchers across the street. Expected. Someone is concerned about our involvement. Pembroke? Possibly. Or someone else with an interest in keeping this case closed. It hardly matters. They cannot see through bulletproof windows, and they cannot hear through walls. Let them watch. He picked up the phone and dialed. After a moment, Mr. Pembroke, Nero Wolfe, I require access to the wines today at 3 p.m. You will provide them, because I am attempting to determine whether you were swindled or whether you are behaving like a suspicious child with a tantrum. Thank you. Archie will collect them. He hung up. At 3 o'clock you will retrieve the wines from Mr. Pembroke's residence and transport them here. I will examine them this evening. You're actually going to taste them? I am going to analyze them using every method at my disposal. That includes taste. Yes, but also visual inspection, chemical testing, and consultation with Fritz regarding aging and storage characteristics. If these wines are forgeries, I will determine how. If they are genuine, I will determine why someone wished them thought otherwise. And if you can't tell, then we will have learned that the distinction itself may be irrelevant, which would be the most interesting outcome of all. He opened his current book and began reading, which meant my audience was over. I returned to my desk and spent the next hour reviewing everything we knew. Fontaine authenticates wines as genuine after 3 weeks of examination. 5 days later, auction happens. Pembroke pays $2 million. 2 days after auction, Fontaine receives $25,000 in cash from unknown source. Next day, Fontaine recants authentication, claims wines are forgeries. Same night, Fontaine has appointment with AV at 10 p.m. Before dawn, Fontaine is dead. Arsenic poisoning staged as suicide. His apartment is searched by someone other than police. 2 clients hire Wolfe with opposite objective. Someone is watching the brownstone. The pattern suggested a conspiracy. But what kind? Who benefited from Fontaine's death? Not Pembroke. He'd lost $2 million. Not the Countess. She'd lost her reputation and faced fraud charges. Not Fontaine himself. He'd lost his life. Someone else. Someone connected to the wines, but not obviously involved in the sale. At 2:30 I headed uptown to Pembroke's residence, a massive apartment on 5th Avenue, overlooking Central Park, with doormen in uniform and an elevator operator who looked like he'd been imported from Victorian England. Pembroke himself answered the door, looking like he'd spent the night chewing carpet tacks. "You're taking them to Wolfe?" "That's the plan. If anything happens to those bottles, I'm holding you personally responsible." "Nothing's going to happen. We're going to look at them, smell them, possibly taste them, and determine whether you paid $2 million for genuine rare wine or very expensive grape juice from somebody's bathtub. Try to contain your excitement." He glared but led me to his wine cellar, a climate-controlled room in the basement that looked like something from a museum. The 12 bottles were arranged on a special shelf, each one individually lit and labeled. They were beautiful in a historical artifact kind of way. Old glass with imperfections, hand-blown shapes slightly irregular, labels aged to brown parchment. Pembroke supervised while I carefully packed them into the cushioned case he provided. Each bottle was wrapped, secured, and documented. By the time we finished, I felt like I was transporting the crown jewels. 3 days, Pembroke said. "I want them back in 3 days. You'll get them back when we're done." Wolfe better not break them. Wolfe doesn't break things. He solves things. There's a difference. I left with the case, took a taxi back to the brownstone. No way was I walking through Manhattan with $2 million worth of maybe genuine wine, and arrived at 3:45. The sedan across the street was still there, both men watching. I gave them a cheerful wave and carried the case inside. Wolfe was at his desk, reading. He glanced up when I entered with the case. Ah, the contested vintage. 12 bottles of alleged pre-phylloxera Burgundy, packed like they're made of spider silk and dreams. Unpack them carefully. We'll begin examination after dinner. I spent the next hour setting up the office for wine analysis. Fritz provided proper glasses, large, clear, unornamented, and a spittoon for tasting. I arranged the bottles on Wolfe's desk, still wrapped, ready for inspection. The afternoon light through the bulletproof windows caught the old glass, refracting through decades-old wine in shades of amber and mahogany. At 6 o'clock, Wolfe descended from the plant rooms. We had dinner, Fritz's beef stew with herbs and vegetables, followed by cheese and fruit, then reconvened in the office. Fritz joined us, his professional interest in aging and fermentation making him useful for this particular investigation. Wolfe stood at his desk, a rare enough event that I made note of it, and examined the first bottle without unwrapping it. He studied the glass, the shape, the way the cork sat in the neck. Then he carefully removed the wrapping and held the bottle up to the light. "The glass is hand-blown," he said. "Late 18th or early 19th century, judging by the irregularities and color. The patina is consistent with age. This bottle is at least 150 years old." He examined the label, using a magnifying glass to study the printing and paper. The label shows appropriate aging, paper degradation, ink fading, slight water damage, consistent with cellar storage. If this is a forgery, someone went to considerable trouble. Next he examined the cork and seal. Wax seal intact, Cork apparently original. The cork shows no evidence of recent insertion, no fresh compression marks, no modern adhesive. Fritz leaned closer. "May I?" Wolfe handed him the bottle. Fritz examined it with the eye of someone who'd spent 50 years preparing and preserving food. The cork has been undisturbed for decades. Look at the wax. It has the kind of cracking that only comes from genuine age. New wax trying to look old would crack differently. Your conclusion? This bottle has not been tampered with since it was sealed. At least not in the past 50 years. Wolfe nodded slowly. Which means, if this is a forgery, the deception occurred when the bottle was filled and sealed, sometime in the mid-19th century or earlier. He carefully uncorked the bottle. The cork came out with difficulty, crumbling slightly, exactly what you'd expect from a cork that had been doing its job for 168 years. Wolfe poured a small amount into one of Fritz's glasses and examined it. Color is appropriate. Aged mahogany, with brick tones at the edge. Clarity is excellent, despite age. No sign of bacterial spoilage or oxidation beyond normal aging. He smelled it, his expression concentrating in that way that meant his full analytical attention was engaged. After a long moment he said, "Complex, dried fruit, forest floor, leather, tobacco, minerality suggesting limestone terroir. This is consistent with mature Burgundy." Then he tasted it. A tiny sip, held in his mouth, then spat into the spittoon. He was silent for almost a full minute, thinking, finally, if this is a forgery, it is the finest I have ever encountered. The wine itself is extraordinary, fully resolved tannins, integrated fruit, extraordinary length. It tastes like wine that has aged properly for over a century and a half. But, I said, because there was clearly a but taste alone cannot determine authenticity with certainty. A skilled forger using genuinely old bottles and corks, with access to old wine from lesser vintages, could potentially create something like this. It would require expertise, resources, and motivation. But it is theoretically possible. He examined the other 11 bottles, going through the same process with each. They were all consistent. Old glass, old corks, old labels, wine that tasted genuine. When he finished, it was past 10 o'clock. Wolfe sat down heavily, looking simultaneously satisfied and frustrated. "Well," I said, "these wines are either genuine or forgeries, so sophisticated that the distinction becomes meaningless. Either way, they represent considerable value, historical, oenological, or as examples of criminal artistry. That doesn't help us. On the contrary, it tells us something important. Gerard Fontaine could not have determined these were forgeries through tasting alone. If he recanted his authentication, he did so based on evidence external to the wines themselves, documentation, provenance, historical research. Someone showed him something that convinced him his original analysis was wrong. What kind of evidence? That is what we must discover. Tomorrow you will visit the auction house that brokered the sale. I want to know every detail of how these bottles came to market. Who handled them? Who verified their provenance? Somewhere in that chain of custody lies the answer to why Gerard Fontaine died. The phone rang. I picked up. Nero Wolfe's office. "Goodwin?" Inspector Kramer's voice, tight and angry. "I just got a call from the precinct. Someone tried to break into Fontaine's apartment tonight. The building super scared them off before they got inside, but they'd already picked the lock. Want to tell me why someone's suddenly interested in a closed suicide case? Because it's not a suicide," I said, "and because whatever Fontaine knew that got him killed, someone's still trying to cover it up. Where's Wolfe?" I looked at Wolfe, who was listening to my end of the conversation with narrowed eyes. He shook his head fractionally. "Not available," I said, "but I'll tell you what we know tomorrow. Right now you might want to put a guard on that apartment. Whoever's looking for something hasn't found it yet. Goodwin, if you're withholding evidence, we're investigating, not withholding. There's a difference. Talk to you tomorrow, Inspector." I hung up before he could threaten arrest. Wolfe was sitting motionless, fingers interlaced, eyes closed. After a long moment he opened them. Someone is desperate. That makes them dangerous. Should we be worried about the brownstone? We have bulletproof windows, 6 dogs, and Fritz's vigilance. We are as secure as possible, without transforming this residence into a fortress. Nevertheless, maintain awareness. Whoever killed Gerard Fontaine has shown both sophistication and ruthlessness. They will not appreciate our involvement. The dark sedan was still across the street when I checked before locking up for the night. I made a note of the license plate, something to have Saul run tomorrow, and secured the brownstone for the evening. As I headed upstairs, Caesar and Mars took up positions in the front hall. Loyal settled near Wolfe's office door. The other 3 dogs distributed themselves throughout the first floor, strategic positions, overlapping coverage, no blind spots. They might not be supernatural, but they were thorough. And in a case involving murder, sophisticated forgery, and $2 million, thoroughness might be the only thing keeping us alive. Friday morning arrived with rain, the cold, persistent March kind that makes Manhattan look like a black and white photograph. I was at my desk by 8:30, working through the files while Wolfe was still upstairs communing with his orchids and pretending the world below didn't exist. Saul had called at 8, with an update. The license plate from the sedan belonged to a private investigation firm that specialized in corporate security and discreet surveillance. They wouldn't say who'd hired them, but Saul had a contact who owed him a favor and was working on it. Meanwhile, the attempt to break into Fontaine's apartment had been clumsy. Picked lock, no finesse, probably an amateur or someone in a hurry. The building super had scared them off before they got inside. 2 separate parties watching and searching. That suggested either multiple interested parties or a conspiracy with poor internal communication. Either way, it meant we were making someone nervous. At 9 o'clock I called the auction house, Ridgefield and Associates, a prestigious firm that handled high-value wine sales. I arranged an appointment with their director of wine acquisitions, a man named Preston Avery, for 10:30. Then I pulled on my coat and hat, checked that my .38 was loaded and accessible, and headed out into the rain. The sedan was gone, but that didn't mean we weren't being watched. I took a deliberately circuitous route, subway to Grand Central, crosstown bus, walked the final 6 blocks, and arrived at Ridgefield and Associates on Madison Avenue, soaked but reasonably certain I hadn't been followed. The auction house occupied 3 floors of a pre-war building with the kind of understated elegance that screamed old money. The receptionist, a woman in her 40s with pearls and an expression suggesting she could smell my wet coat from across the room, examined my card with visible skepticism. "Mr. Avery is expecting you. 10:30 appointment. Archie Goodwin." She made a phone call, listened, then nodded. "3rd floor. The elevator is behind you." Preston Avery's office looked like a museum curator's dream. Wood paneling, Persian rugs, walls lined with framed wine labels from legendary vintages. Avery himself was early 50s, slim and elegant in a 3-piece suit, with steel grey hair and the kind of handshake that suggested he'd rather be holding a wine glass. "Mr. Goodwin, please sit. Your call mentioned the de Bourbon Vendôme wines?" I settled into a leather chair that probably cost more than my car. "That's right. I'm investigating Gerard Fontaine's death on behalf of a client. I need to know everything about how those wines came to auction." His expression shifted from polite to guarded. "Gerard's death was ruled suicide. The ruling was premature. We believe he was murdered. By whom? That's what we're trying to determine. Tell me about the wines." He studied me for a moment, then stood and moved to a filing cabinet. He pulled out a thick folder and returned to his desk. "The de Bourbon Vendôme consignment came to us last December. The Countess contacted us directly with documentation of the wine's provenance, family records, architectural drawings showing the hidden cellar location, photographs of the excavation. She wanted authentication and a major auction." "Why your firm?" "We specialize in rare wine sales. We have relationships with serious collectors worldwide. A discovery of this magnitude required expertise and discretion." He opened the folder, showing me documents. "We examined the preliminary documentation and agreed to represent her, contingent on proper authentication." "That's where Fontaine came in?" "Yes. We hired Gerard to examine the wines and render a professional opinion. He was the best in the business. If Gerard authenticated something, collectors trusted it implicitly." "How long did the authentication take?" 3 weeks. Gerard was extraordinarily thorough. He examined the bottles, analyzed the corks and seals, researched the historical documentation, consulted chemical experts about the glass composition. He left nothing to chance. And his conclusion? The wines were genuine. Pre-phylloxera Burgundy from the de Bourbon Vendôme estate, dated 1857, in extraordinary condition. His authentication document was 30 pages of detailed analysis. Avery's expression suggested professional pride mixed with current confusion. Based on Gerard's report, we scheduled the auction for February 25th. "How many bidders?" 8 serious contenders. The final bidding was between Lawrence Pembroke and a Hong Kong collector named Wei Chen. Pembroke won at $2 million. The sale was completed the following day, February 26th. The wines were transferred to Pembroke's climate-controlled vault. We collected our commission. The matter seemed successfully concluded, until Fontaine recanted. Avery's jaw tightened. Yes. On March 1st, Gerard called me in a state of considerable agitation. He said he'd made a terrible error, that the wines were sophisticated forgeries, and that he needed to issue a formal retraction. I was stunned. Gerard had never made an error in 30 years. I asked what evidence had changed his mind. What did he say? He wouldn't tell me over the phone. He said he'd discovered something in the historical documentation that invalidated the provenance, that he needed to verify it before going public. We arranged to meet the following morning at my office. He never arrived. That night, he died. I made notes. What happened after his death? Chaos. Pembroke immediately claimed fraud and demanded his money back. The Countess insisted the wines were genuine, and that Gerard had been coerced or deceived into recanting. We were caught in the middle. Our reputation depends on selling authentic items, but we'd relied on Gerard's authentication in good faith. The police ruled his death suicide, which suggested professional disgrace rather than murder. We've been in legal limbo ever since. Who had access to the wines between authentication and auction? They remained in our climate-controlled vault from the moment they arrived until they were transferred to Pembroke. Only 3 people had access: myself, our vault manager, and our head of security. The vault has electronic locks and requires 2-person authorization to open. Could anyone have tampered with the wines? Theoretically, yes, if they had both access codes and sufficient time. Practically, no. The vault is monitored constantly. Any unauthorized entry would have triggered alarms. What about the documentation? Could someone have altered the provenance records? Avery paused. That's an interesting question. The Countess provided the original documentation, family records, architectural drawings, photographs. We verified what we could through French archives and historical societies. Everything checked out. But yes, if someone had access to French historical records and sufficient expertise, they could potentially create convincing forgeries. How difficult would that be? Extraordinarily difficult. You'd need access to period paper, appropriate inks, knowledge of 18th and 19th century French record-keeping practices, familiarity with Burgundy's wine-producing families, and the ability to forge multiple documents across different archives. It would require months of work and considerable resources. But it's possible. Anything is possible with sufficient motivation and skill. But why? The Countess received $2 million for the wines. If she'd forged the provenance, why would she hire someone like Gerard, who might expose the fraud? Maybe she didn't know he would. Or maybe someone else forged the documents without her knowledge. Avery frowned. To what end? That's what we're trying to figure out. I flipped through my notes. You mentioned an appointment with Fontaine the morning after he died. What time? 9 a.m. I arrived at 8:45 and waited until 9:30. When he didn't appear and didn't answer his phone, I called his assistant Claire Daubigny. She said the police had just informed her that Gerard had been found dead in his apartment. Did Fontaine mention anyone else he was meeting that night? No. Our conversation was brief, perhaps 5 minutes. He was clearly upset and unwilling to discuss details over the phone. I got the impression he was frightened, which was unusual for Gerard. He wasn't a man who frightened easily. One more question. Do you know anyone with the initials AV who might have had business with Fontaine? Avery thought about it. AV? No one comes to mind. Why? Fontaine had an appointment with someone using those initials the night he died. 10 p.m. We're trying to identify them. I'm sorry, I can't help you. Gerard worked with dozens of people, collectors, dealers, chemists, historians. Any of them might use those initials. I stood. If you think of anything else, call me at the brownstone. And Mr. Avery, be careful. Someone murdered Gerard Fontaine to keep him quiet. They might not appreciate you talking to us. His face went pale. You think I'm in danger? I think anyone connected to those wines should watch their back until we figure out what's really going on. I left him looking considerably less elegant than when I'd arrived. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and grey. I took the subway back downtown, checking periodically to make sure I wasn't being followed. No obvious tail, but that didn't mean much. Good surveillance is invisible. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe at his desk with the 12 bottles still arranged nearby. He'd apparently spent the morning reading Fontaine's authentication document again, making notes in the margins with his fountain pen. "Learn anything useful?" he asked without looking up. I gave him the full report from Avery. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced. "The vault security makes tampering with the wines unlikely. Therefore, if fraud occurred, it was either in the original filling and sealing of the bottles, which would have happened in France in the 1850s, or in the documentation establishing provenance." Avery says, "Forging the documentation would be extraordinarily difficult. Difficult but not impossible. And the payoff was $2 million, which provides considerable motivation." He was silent for a moment. "The key question remains, what did Mr. Fontaine discover between February 26th and March 1st that convinced him to recant his authentication? Maybe someone showed him proof the documentation was forged. Perhaps. But that raises another question. Why would the forger then murder him? If Mr. Fontaine was recanting publicly, the fraud would be exposed regardless. His death serves no purpose unless..." He stopped mid-sentence, eyes focusing on something I couldn't see. Unless what? Unless his retraction was itself the objective. Someone wanted Mr. Fontaine to declare the wines fraudulent, not to hide a fraud but to create one. The doubt itself is the weapon. I stared at him. "You're saying someone framed the Countess? Made genuine wines look fake?" "I'm saying that if the wines are genuine, and my examination suggests they are, then someone went to considerable effort to cast doubt upon them. That suggests the objective was not financial gain through fraud, but damage through suspicion. Who benefits from that? An excellent question. The Countess loses her reputation and faces criminal charges. Mr. Pembroke loses $2 million and looks foolish. The auction house's credibility is damaged. Mr. Fontaine lost his life. Who wins? Someone who wanted to destroy one or more of those parties? Or someone who wanted to acquire the wines at a reduced price? If Mr. Pembroke demands his money back and the Countess is discredited, the wines might be sold again at auction, this time under a cloud of suspicion that would dramatically reduce their value. So someone poisons the deal, waits for the price to collapse, then buys them cheap. It's a theory. We have insufficient evidence to confirm it, but it fits the pattern of events." He glanced at the clock. "It's nearly lunchtime. After we eat, you will visit the Countess at her hotel. I want to know precisely how she discovered the hidden cellar, who knew about her search, and whether anyone could have planted those bottles for her to find. You think someone set her up? I think someone has gone to extraordinary lengths to create a situation where genuine wines appear fraudulent, where a reputable sommelier recants and dies mysteriously, and where multiple parties are damaged. That requires planning, resources, and a motive we have not yet identified. Find the motive, and we'll find the murderer." Fritz announced lunch: broiled swordfish with lemon and herbs, preceded by mushroom soup. We ate in the dining room while Caesar and Loyal maintained their usual positions. Through the bulletproof windows, I could see the street, quiet and rain-washed. No obvious surveillance, but I had the crawling sensation of being watched anyway. After lunch, I headed to the Countess's hotel, the Barclay on East 48th Street. The kind of establishment where the desk clerks wear morning coats and the lobby smells faintly of expensive perfume and old money. I sent up my card and was directed to the 6th floor. The Countess answered the door herself, dressed in a simple grey dress that probably cost what I made in a month. Her suite was elegant, but not ostentatious. Sitting room with period furniture, bedroom visible through an open door, writing desk covered with papers and photographs. "Mr. Goodwin, have you made progress?" "We're working on it. I need to ask you some questions about how you found the wines." She gestured to a chair. "Please." I sat. "Start from the beginning. How did you learn about the hidden cellar?" "Family records. When my brother died 5 years ago, I inherited his papers, including correspondence and documents dating back 2 centuries. Among them was a letter written by my great-great-grandfather Armand de Bourg-Vendôme in 1858. He was dying of consumption and wanted to preserve something of the family's heritage. He described sealing 12 bottles of the estate's finest vintage in a hidden cellar beneath the chapel ruins. Where was this? The original estate near Beaune in Burgundy. The property was sold after the phylloxera epidemic destroyed our vines in the 18th. The chateau eventually collapsed, and the land changed hands several times. By the time I learned about the cellar, The property belonged to a farmer who used it for grazing sheep. How did you gain access? I purchased the land. It took 3 years of negotiations and cost me nearly everything I had, but I finally acquired it in 2020. The excavation began last year. Who knew about this? Very few people. My lawyer in France, the archaeologist I hired to supervise the excavation, the workers who did the actual digging, perhaps a dozen people total. Could any of them have planted the bottles? Her eyes flashed. Absolutely not. The cellar was sealed. We broke through walls that hadn't been disturbed in over a century. The bottles were exactly where Armand's letter described them, covered in dust and cobwebs, with the wax seals intact. No one could have placed them there recently. Unless someone had access to the site before you began excavating. The property had been farmland for decades. There were no structures, no recent excavations. The sheep had grazed over the chapel ruins for years. If someone had dug there recently, it would have been obvious. What about the bottles themselves? Could someone have prepared them in advance, filled old bottles with new wine, sealed them with old wax, aged the labels artificially? To what end? I owned the property. I supervised the excavation. Why would someone plant bottles for me to discover if they gained nothing from it? Maybe they gained something we haven't identified yet. Tell me about the archaeologist. Who was he? Dr. Michel Trudeau, from the University of Lyon. He's an expert in medieval and early modern French archaeology. I hired him because I needed someone who could properly document the excavation photographs, stratigraphic analysis, verification that the site had been undisturbed. His report confirms everything. I made notes. Was anyone else present during the excavation? The workers, obviously. My lawyer, Alain Bertrand, visited several times, and there was a wine historian who heard about the discovery and asked to observe an American named Vincent Ashford. He was researching pre-phylloxera Burgundy and was fascinated by the find. Vincent Ashford, VA. Could be AV backward, or initials reversed. Her eyebrows rose. You think Vincent had something to do with Gerard's death? I think anyone connected to those wines is potentially relevant. Tell me about him. He appeared shortly after we began excavating, said he'd heard about the project through academic channels. He seemed legitimate, produced credentials showing he was affiliated with a wine research institute in California. He observed the excavation, took photographs, made extensive notes. He seemed genuinely excited about the discovery. Did he have access to the bottles? Not alone, no. But he was present when we opened the cellar. He saw everything, and after the bottles were removed, they were transported to Paris for initial analysis, then shipped to New York for the auction. Vincent returned to America around the same time, said he wanted to document the authentication process. Gerard allowed him to observe some of his work. I sat forward. Fontaine let this Vincent Ashford watch him authenticate the wines? Yes. Gerard was generous with his knowledge. He enjoyed educating people about wine authentication. Did Ashford have any contact with Fontaine after the authentication was complete? I don't know. You would have to ask Claire Daubigny. She handled Gerard's schedule. I stood. I need Vincent Ashford's contact information. Everything you have. She moved to the writing desk and pulled out a card. This is the institute he said he was affiliated with, the Napa Valley Wine Research Foundation. I don't have his personal address, but they should be able to reach him. I pocketed the card. One more thing. The $25,000 Fontaine received in cash 2 days after the auction. Do you know anything about that? Her face went carefully neutral. No. Should I? Someone paid him to recant his authentication. He took the money, possibly to identify who was behind it. Then he was murdered. If you know anything about that payment, now would be a good time to mention it. I know nothing about it, Mr. Goodwin. I paid Gerard $50,000 through the auction house's escrow account for his authentication services. That was our only financial transaction, and you have no idea who might have paid him to recant. None whatsoever. If I knew, I would tell you. This situation has destroyed my reputation and threatens me with criminal prosecution. I want the truth exposed as much as you do. I studied her. She met my gaze steadily, without flinching. Either she was telling the truth, or she was an extraordinary actress. We'll be in touch, I said. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe preparing for his afternoon session in the plant rooms. I caught him before he reached the elevator. Vincent Ashford, wine historian, American, affiliated with something called the Napa Valley Wine Research Foundation. He observed the excavation in France, watched Fontaine authenticate the wines, and has the initials VA, which could be AV, if reversed or written carelessly. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Initials are suggestive but not conclusive. However, his presence at both the discovery and the authentication is interesting. He had opportunity to observe everything, and to plant evidence, tamper with documentation, or poison Fontaine if he got suspicious. Perhaps have Saul investigate this Vincent Ashford thoroughly. I want to know his background, his credentials, his financial situation, and his whereabouts on the night Mr. Fontaine died. Also contact the Napa Valley Wine Research Foundation, verify his affiliation, and learn what they know about his activities. You think he's our killer? I think he is insufficiently explained. When someone appears repeatedly in a sequence of events without clear justification, they warrant scrutiny. He stepped into the elevator. We will discuss this further after my orchid time. For now I wish to contemplate cattleyas and ignore the tedious business of murder. The elevator rose. I returned to the office and got Saul on the phone. Vincent Ashford, probably late 40s or early 50s, American, claims affiliation with the Napa Valley Wine Research Foundation. I need everything. Background, credentials, finances, criminal record, current whereabouts. Specific interest? He was present at both the discovery of the wines in France and Fontaine's authentication process in New York. He had opportunity to observe everything and possibly tamper with evidence. Also, his initials might match an appointment in Fontaine's calendar the night he died. I'll get on it. Might take a day or two if he's in California. Make it fast. Someone's getting nervous and we're running out of time before they do something desperate. After Saul hung up, I called the Napa Valley Wine Research Foundation. A pleasant-voiced woman answered, and I asked for Vincent Ashford. I'm sorry, Mr. Ashford is on sabbatical. He's conducting research in Europe and won't return until May. Can you tell me how to reach him? I'm afraid not. He's traveling and checking in only periodically. May I take a message? When did he leave for Europe? Early February. He's been gone about 5 weeks. And he's definitely in Europe? That's what we were told. Is there a problem? No problem. Just trying to get in touch. When he calls in, have him contact Archie Goodwin at this number. I gave her the Brownstone's phone. I'll make a note. Is this regarding his research? You could say that. What exactly is he researching? Pre-phylloxera wine production in Burgundy. He received a grant to study historical vineyards and authentication techniques. It's quite prestigious. He's one of our leading scholars. I'm sure he is. Thanks for your help. I hung up and stared at my notes. Vincent Ashford was supposedly in Europe conducting research. The Countess said he'd returned to America before the authentication. Either the Foundation was mistaken about his whereabouts, or Ashford had lied to one party or both. The phone rang. I picked up. Nero Wolfe's office. Goodwin. Inspector Kramer's voice, even more irritated than usual. I want you and Wolfe at the precinct tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. We need to discuss what you know about the Fontaine case. We're investigating privately. We don't report to the police. The hell you don't. Someone tried to break into Fontaine's apartment again last night. This time they succeeded. The place was ransacked. If you know something that explains why people are suddenly interested in a dead wine expert's apartment, I want to hear it. What was taken? We don't know yet. Claire Daubigny is coming in tomorrow to identify what's missing. But whoever did it was looking for something specific. They ignored valuables and focused on papers and files, looking for what Fontaine discovered that got him killed. Exactly. So tomorrow, 9 a.m., you and Wolfe explain what you've learned. No excuses. Wolfe doesn't leave the brownstone for non-emergencies. You know that. Then I'll come there. 9 a.m. And Goodwin, if you obstruct this investigation, I will arrest you both for interference with police business. See you at 9, Inspector. Bring coffee. Fritz makes terrible coffee, and you'll need something to sustain you through Wolfe's explanations. I hung up before he could threaten me further. This was getting complicated. Kramer would want everything we knew, which meant revealing our clients and possibly compromising the investigation. Wolfe would resist on principle, which meant tomorrow morning would feature a lot of verbal sparring and very little actual information exchange. At 6 o'clock, Wolfe descended from the plant rooms, looking satisfied, which meant Theodore had shown him something particularly impressive among the orchids. We had dinner, then reconvened in the office. Inspector Kramer will visit tomorrow morning at 9, I said. Someone ransacked Fontaine's apartment last night. They're still looking for whatever Fontaine discovered. They won't find it. How do you know? Because if it was in his apartment, Mr. Fontaine would have mentioned it when he recanted. He would have shown evidence to his clients or the auction house. Instead, he was vague, promised explanations, and died before providing them. That suggests the evidence existed somewhere else, or existed only in his memory. Maybe he hid it. Possible. But more likely, the evidence was something he recognized rather than something he possessed. A pattern, a discrepancy, a connection, something that couldn't be stolen, because it existed in his understanding rather than on paper. That doesn't help us find it. On the contrary, it tells us we must think as Mr. Fontaine thought. We must examine what he examined and recognize what he recognized. The wines themselves are genuine. I am increasingly certain of that. Therefore, the fraud, if any, lies not in the bottles but in the circumstances surrounding them. The phone rang. I picked up. Nero Wolfe's office. Archie? It's Saul. I've got preliminary information on Vincent Ashford. That was fast. I know people. Vincent Ashford, age 48, PhD in oenology from UC Davis, 15 years with the Napa Valley Wine Research Foundation. Published extensively on wine authentication and historical viticulture. No criminal record, solid reputation in his field. Financially comfortable, but not wealthy. Academic salary, consulting income, grant money. Current whereabouts. That's where it gets interesting. The foundation says he's in Europe on sabbatical, but I checked with customs and immigration. Vincent Ashford entered France on February 1st and returned to New York on February 18th. He hasn't left the country since, so he's been in New York for 3 weeks, and the foundation doesn't know it, or they're covering for him. Either way, he lied about his location. And here's something else. I checked his credit card activity. He's been staying at the Chelsea Hotel since February 20th, 2 days before Fontaine issued his authentication report. The Chelsea, that's 10 blocks from Fontaine's apartment. Exactly. And there's more. On March 1st, the day Fontaine recanted and died, Ashford made a cash withdrawal of $25,000 from his bank account. The room went very quiet. Wolfe's eyes opened fully, focused on me with complete attention. 25,000, I said slowly. The same amount Fontaine received in cash. The same amount. Ashford withdrew it at 9 a.m. March 1st. Fontaine received his cash payment later that day. The timing fits perfectly. Location of the withdrawal? Branch on 5th Avenue, near the public library, not far from the auction house or Fontaine's apartment. Ashford could have easily delivered the cash personally. I looked at Wolfe. We've got him. Vincent Ashford paid Fontaine to recant, probably had the 10 p.m. appointment, and murdered him when Fontaine tried to expose the bribery. Perhaps, Wolfe said. But why? What does Mr. Ashford gain from casting doubt on wines he helped discover? Maybe he wants to buy them cheap after Pembroke returns them. Buying them requires $2 million, which Mr. Ashford does not possess. And murdering Mr. Fontaine creates police scrutiny that would make acquiring the wines more difficult, not less. No, there's something else. Some motivation we haven't identified. Saul's voice came through the phone. Want me to locate Ashford? Yes, I said. Find him and put surveillance on him. Don't approach, don't spook him. Just track his movements. We need to know what he's doing and who he's meeting. On it. He hung up. I looked at Wolfe. We've got our murderer. We have a suspect with opportunity and circumstantial evidence. We do not yet have proof, nor do we have motive. Without both, Mr. Ashford remains merely interesting rather than guilty. He paid Fontaine $25,000 the day Fontaine died. What more do you need? To understand why, Mr. Ashford is a wine historian with a solid reputation and comfortable income. Why would he risk everything to cast doubt on a discovery he helped document? Why bribe a sommelier to recant, then murder him? What does he gain that justifies such extreme measures? Maybe he's working for someone else. Possible. But who? And toward what end? The doorbell rang. Through the office door I could see Fritz heading for the front hall. He checked the peephole, then opened up. Claire Daubigny stood on the stoop, rain-soaked and agitated. Fritz showed her to the office. She stood dripping on the carpet, her face pale and frightened. Mr. Wolfe, Mr. Goodwin, I'm sorry to disturb you, but something's happened. My apartment was broken into tonight, while I was at the police station, identifying what was taken from Gerard's apartment. They ransacked everything: files, papers, personal belongings. They were looking for something. What was taken? Wolfe asked. Nothing valuable. They ignored jewelry and money. But they took all of Gerard's professional correspondence that I'd kept. Letters from collectors, auction house documents, authentication records, anything connected to his work, including records of the de Bourbon Vendôme wines. Yes, everything related to that case. It's all gone. Wolfe leaned back in his chair. Miss Daubigny, do you know a man named Vincent Ashford? Her eyes widened. Yes, he's a wine historian. He observed some of Gerard's authentication work on the Burgundy bottles. Why? Did he have access to Gerard's apartment or office? He came to the apartment several times during the authentication process. Gerard was generous about sharing his methods with other professionals. Vincent seemed fascinated by the project. Did Mr. Fontaine trust him? She paused, thinking. Gerard was cautious about trust, but he seemed comfortable with Vincent. They discussed the wines extensively. Vincent asked detailed questions about the authentication process, the historical documentation, the chemical analysis. Gerard appreciated his expertise. When did you last see Mr. Ashford? February 27th, the day after the auction. He came to Gerard's apartment to congratulate him on the successful authentication. They talked for perhaps an hour. I remember because Vincent seemed particularly interested in the provenance documentation. He asked if he could photograph some of the records for his research. Gerard allowed it. Wolfe's fingers drummed once on his desk, a sign of significant thought. And did Mr. Fontaine seem troubled after this conversation? Now that you mention it, yes. Gerard was quiet that evening, distracted. I asked if something was wrong, but he said he needed to verify something about the documentation. He spent the next 2 days going through historical records, making phone calls to archivists in France. He was agitated. And then, on March 1st, he received $25,000 in cash and recanted his authentication. Her face went pale. You think Vincent paid him? But why? That, Wolfe said heavily, is what we must determine. Miss Daubigny, you should not return to your apartment tonight. It is unsafe. Archie will arrange a hotel room for you, and you will remain there until this matter is resolved. But someone has murdered Mr. Fontaine and is now systematically eliminating evidence. You have been his assistant for 5 years. You may possess knowledge or documentation that makes you a target. Please do not be foolish about this. She nodded slowly, fear replacing confusion on her face. All right. I called the Walcott Hotel on 31st Street and arranged a room under a false name. Then I drove Claire there personally, taking a roundabout route and checking repeatedly for surveillance, and made sure she was settled before returning to the brownstone. When I got back, Wolfe was sitting motionless with his eyes closed. I knew that pose. He was assembling pieces, building a structure of logic that would eventually reveal the truth. I didn't disturb him. Instead, I reviewed everything we knew. Vincent Ashford observed excavation in France. Ashford watched Fontaine authenticate wines. Ashford visited Fontaine. February 27th. Examined provenance documentation. Fontaine became agitated, spent 2 days verifying something. Ashford withdrew 25,000 cash March once. Fontaine received 25,000 cash March once. Wink. Fontaine recanted authentication March 1. Fontaine probably met A.V. Ashford at 10 p.m. March once. Fontaine died that night. Arsenic poisoning. Fontaine's apartment searched multiple times. Claire's apartment ransacked. All authentication records stolen. The pattern was clear. Ashford had discovered something about the wines or their provenance, shown it to Fontaine, paid him to recant publicly, then murdered him to prevent explanation. But what had he discovered, and why go to such lengths? At 11 p.m., Wolfe's eyes opened. Tomorrow, he said, we will confront Mr. Ashford. But first I must verify something. The French archives that documented the de Vendôme family records. I want them contacted immediately. Find out if anyone has requested information about the family or the estate in the past year, particularly regarding the hidden cellar or the 1857 vintage. It's almost midnight. The archives are in France. They'll be closed. Then call at dawn their time. This cannot wait. Someone has manipulated historical documentation to create doubt about authentic wines. I need to know who and how. You think Ashford forged documents? I think Mr. Ashford discovered something that allowed him to question the provenance. Whether that discovery was genuine or manufactured, we must determine. Now go to bed. Tomorrow will be strenuous. He stood and headed for his bedroom. I locked up the brownstone, checked that all 6 dogs were settled in their positions. They were, alert but calm, and climbed the stairs to my room. Somewhere in Manhattan, Vincent Ashford was either sleeping peacefully or lying awake, wondering if we were getting close. I knew which scenario I preferred. And tomorrow, we'd find out which was true. I was awake at 5 a.m. The time difference meant French archives would be opening, and on the phone by 6. After 3 transfers, and my best attempt at French enhanced by hand gestures, the person on the other end couldn't see. I reached someone who spoke English and understood what I needed. Yes, we maintain records for the de Bourbon-Vendôme family. The archive is quite extensive. Wine production records, property documents, family correspondence dating back to 1680. Has anyone requested information about the family in the past year? Let me check. Papers rustling. Yes, we had 2 requests. The first was from Countess Helen de Bourbon-Vendôme in December 2019, requesting genealogical verification and access to property records. The second was from Dr. Vincent Ashford of the Napa Valley Wine Research Foundation in January 2020. He was researching pre-phylloxera viticulture and requested access to estate wine production records. What specifically did he examine? According to our records, he reviewed vintages from 1850 through 1860, particularly focusing on the 1857 vintage mentioned in the family correspondence. He also examined architectural documents related to the estate buildings. Did he request information about the hidden cellar? No mention of that specifically. He seemed interested in production volumes, vineyard locations and storage techniques. Did he make copies of any documents? Our policy allows photographs for research purposes. Dr. Ashford took quite extensive photographs of the records. He spent 3 days here. 3 days? Yes, in early February. He was very thorough. I thanked her and hung up. Wolfe was already at breakfast. Fritz's scrambled eggs with herbs, bacon, toast with his apricot preserves. I joined him and reported what I'd learned. Ashford spent 3 days in French archives in early February, photographing wine production records from the 1850s. He was researching the exact period and vineyard where the de Bourbon-Vendôme wine supposedly came from. Wolfe finished his eggs before responding. Mr. Ashford is an oenological scholar. Such research would be normal for someone writing about pre-phylloxera viticulture, or for someone planning to question the authenticity of recently discovered bottles. Yes, the question is, did he discover information that genuinely contradicted the provenance, or did he discover information he could use to manufacture doubt? Either way, he's got knowledge that got Fontaine killed, apparently. Wolfe finished his coffee. Inspector Kramer arrives at 9. Before then, I wish to examine the Countess's documentation more carefully. Bring me her complete file. I retrieved the file from the safe and spread it on the dining room table. Wolfe spent the next hour going through every document with methodical attention: genealogical records, architectural drawings, excavation photographs, chemical analysis reports, Fontaine's authentication. At 8:45 he looked up. Interesting. What? The architectural drawing showing the hidden cellar location. Notice the date, 1858, drawn by estate architect Henri Marchand. But look at the paper and ink. I examined it closely. Looks old to me. It looks appropriately aged. Yes, but the paper has been artificially distressed. The foxing is too uniform, the creases too deliberate. This document was created recently to appear historical. How can you tell? The ink composition. Modern iron gall ink ages differently than 19th century formulations. This ink has been chemically treated to simulate aging, but under magnification the degradation pattern is wrong. Someone with considerable expertise created this document, but it is nevertheless fraudulent. I stared at the drawing. So the hidden cellar location was based on a forged document? It appears so, which raises an extraordinary question. Did someone forge this document to help the Countess locate genuine bottles hidden by her ancestor? Or did someone forge it to plant bottles for her to discover? That's insane. Why would anyone go to that trouble? An excellent question. Wolfe stood, looking ponderously satisfied. I believe I am beginning to understand. But we require Mr. Ashford's cooperation to confirm my theory. When he arrives, the doorbell rang. Through the hallway I could see Kramer's stocky silhouette on the stoop, punctual as always. I went to let him in. Caesar was already at the door, tail motionless, his version of wary alertness. He recognized Kramer but maintained protocol. Mars and Apollo appeared from the front room, flanking the entrance. I opened up. Inspector, right on time. Kramer came in, glancing at the three Dobermans with the expression of a man who'd learned not to make sudden movements around them. Where's Wolfe? Office. Coffee? God, yes. Fritz had anticipated. He was already bringing a tray with coffee and the good cups. Kramer accepted his gratefully and followed me to the office. Wolfe was back in his desk chair, the documentation spread before him. Inspector, good morning. Wolfe, I want to know what you've learned about Gerard Fontaine's death. I have learned considerably more than the police, apparently. Would you care to sit? Kramer sat in the red leather chair, his jaw working on his unlit cigar. Don't get smart. Someone ransacked Fontaine's apartment, twice. Claire Daubigny's apartment was also searched. People don't break into apartments looking for information about a suicide. So tell me what's really going on. Wolfe drank beer, taking his time. Very well. Gerard Fontaine was murdered because he discovered that the de Bourbon Vendôme wine authentication was based on partially fraudulent documentation. Someone paid him $25,000 to recant publicly, intending to destroy confidence in the wines and damage the Countess's credibility. When Mr. Fontaine attempted to expose the bribery, he was poisoned with arsenic. Kramer's eyes narrowed. Who paid him? Dr. Vincent Ashford, a wine historian, affiliated with the Napa Valley Wine Research Foundation. Mr. Ashford withdrew exactly $25,000 in cash, the same day Mr. Fontaine received his payment. Mr. Ashford also had the initials AV, matching an appointment in Mr. Fontaine's calendar the night he died. You've got proof of this? Circumstantial evidence. Yes. Definitive proof. Not yet. Which is why I require your cooperation. My cooperation for what? I intend to invite Mr. Ashford here this afternoon to discuss his research. During that conversation, I will encourage him to explain his actions. Your presence discreetly positioned may prove useful if he becomes uncooperative or violent. You want me to hide in your brownstone while you play detective. I want you to perform your professional duty, apprehending a murderer, while I perform mine, exposing the truth. Our objectives align. Kramer chewed on that, literally. If Ashford killed Fontaine, why? What does he gain? That, Wolfe said, is what we must discover. Mr. Ashford is an academic with a modest income. He cannot personally benefit from destroying the authentication. Therefore, he is either acting from principle, having discovered genuine fraud, or acting as an agent for someone else. Either way, his motivation will reveal the truth. And if he won't talk, then you arrest him for murder based on the evidence we've assembled. But I prefer he explain himself. Solving crimes is satisfying. Understanding them is illuminating. Kramer drained his coffee. Fine. I'll be here this afternoon. But Wolfe, if this goes sideways, I'm arresting all of you. You, Goodwin, and Ashford. Understood? Perfectly. After Kramer left, I said, You think Ashford will just walk in here and confess? I think Mr. Ashford believes himself clever and justified. Such people often cannot resist explaining their brilliance. We will provide him the opportunity. He glanced at the clock. Contact Mr. Ashford at the Chelsea Hotel. Invite him here at 3 p.m. to discuss his research into pre-phylloxera Burgundy. Tell him we've made discoveries he would find fascinating. And if he refuses, he won't. He'll want to know what we've learned. Curiosity is the weakness of the intelligent. I called the Chelsea Hotel and asked for Vincent Ashford. After a moment, a voice answered. Cultured, academic, with a slight California accent. Dr. Ashford? Archie Goodwin. Calling on behalf of Nero Wolfe. We're investigating the de Bourbon Vendôme wine authentication and Gerard Fontaine's death. We've uncovered some fascinating information about the historical documentation that we thought you'd find interesting. Would you be available this afternoon at 3? Silence. Then, what kind of information? The kind better discussed in person. Mr. Wolfe has examined the wines and the provenance records. He has questions about your research in the French archives and your relationship with Mr. Fontaine. Another pause. Are you accusing me of something? We're trying to understand what happened. You were present at key moments. The excavation, the authentication, the days before Mr. Fontaine's death. Your expertise could help us resolve some puzzling contradictions. I'm not sure I should discuss this without a lawyer. That's certainly your right. But Mr. Wolfe is investigating privately, not building a criminal case. He's interested in truth, not prosecution. If you have information that explains the situation, now would be the time to share it. Long silence. Finally, 3 o'clock. I'll be there. Excellent. The address is 918 West 35th Street. Ring the bell and Fritz will show you in. I hung up. He's coming. Sounded nervous. Good. Nervous people make mistakes. We will encourage him to make several. Wolfe rang for Fritz. We will need refreshments this afternoon. Something suitable for a confrontation. Cheese, crackers, beer, coffee. Nothing that suggests hospitality or comfort. Fritz nodded and withdrew. Wolfe leaned back, fingers interlaced. This afternoon will be instructive, Archie. We will learn whether Mr. Ashford is a murderer acting from greed, a scholar acting from principle, or a pawn acting under direction. Each possibility leads to different conclusions. What's your guess? I do not guess. I observe, deduce, and conclude. But I will say this. Someone has orchestrated an elaborate scheme involving historical research, document forgery, bribery, and murder that requires resources, expertise, and ruthless determination. Mr. Ashford may possess expertise, but resources and ruthlessness suggest someone else is involved. Who? We shall discover this afternoon. The hours until 3 p.m. passed slowly. Wolfe retreated to the plant rooms for his sacred orchid time. I reviewed the case files again, making sure I had everything organized. Saul called at 1 to report that Ashford had left the Chelsea Hotel at noon, taken a taxi to a bank, withdrawn $5,000 in cash, then returned to his hotel. Nervous money, either planning to run or preparing to pay someone off. At 2:45, Kramer arrived with Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins. I positioned them in the front room where they could listen, but not be seen. The dogs investigated. Caesar approached Kramer and accepted a brief head scratch, acknowledging the familiar presence. Loyal sniffed Stebbins and settled nearby, watchful but not hostile. At 3 p.m. precisely, the doorbell rang. Vincent Ashford was taller than I'd expected, 6'2", lean build, late 40s, with sandy hair going grey and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a tweed jacket with elbow patches and carried a leather satchel. He looked exactly like what he was supposed to be, an academic wine historian. Fritz showed him to the office. Wolfe was at his desk, the 12 bottles of de Bourg von Vendôme Burgundy arranged nearby like evidence in a trial. Ashford stopped in the doorway, staring at them. "Dr. Ashford," Wolfe said, "please sit." Ashford moved to the red leather chair slowly, his eyes never leaving the bottles. "Those are the wines?" "Indeed. Would you care to examine them?" "I've already examined them, in France during the excavation, and again during Gerard's authentication process." "Yes, I know. You were remarkably thorough in your observations, almost as if you were documenting something specific." Wolfe paused. "Coffee? No, thank you." Ashford set his satchel on the floor beside the chair, his movements careful. "Your assistant said you had questions about my research." "Several questions. But first, let me explain what we've learned. These wines are genuine. I've examined them extensively and find no evidence of forgery in the bottles themselves. However, the documentation establishing their provenance contains at least one fraudulent element, the architectural drawing showing the hidden cellar location." Ashford's face went carefully neutral. "How do you know it's fraudulent?" "Paper aging is artificial, ink composition is modern, physical wear patterns are too uniform. The document was created recently to appear historical. Someone with considerable expertise forged it. That doesn't necessarily mean the wines are fake." "No. But it raises interesting questions. Who forged the document? Why? And what does it tell us about the wine's true origin?" Wolfe leaned forward slightly. "You spent 3 days in French archives photographing production records from the 1850s. You examined the exact vintages and vineyard locations relevant to these bottles. What did you discover?" Ashford was silent, his hands gripping the chair arms. Wolfe continued. "On February 27th, you visited Gerard Fontaine and examined the provenance documentation. Afterward, Mr. Fontaine became agitated and spent 2 days verifying information. On March 1st, you withdrew $25,000 in cash. That same day, Mr. Fontaine received $25,000 and recanted his authentication. That evening, you met him at 10 p.m. By dawn, he was dead of arsenic poisoning. You're accusing me of murder. I'm stating facts." The interpretation is yours. I didn't kill Gerard. Then explain the facts. Why did you pay him $25,000? Ashford looked at the bottles, then at Wolfe, then at his own hands. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. Because I discovered the truth, and the truth was dangerous. What truth? That the wines are genuine, but the story of how they were discovered is partially fabricated. Someone wanted these bottles found, wanted them authenticated, wanted them sold, and was willing to manipulate historical records to make it happen. Wolfe's expression didn't change. Continue. Ashford took a breath. I've been researching pre-phylloxera Burgundy for 15 years. When I heard about the de Bourbon-Vendôme discovery, I was fascinated. Genuinely sealed bottles from the 1850s are extraordinarily rare. I observed the excavation in France, and everything seemed legitimate. Undisturbed seals, appropriate aging, proper storage. But something bothered me. What? The architectural drawing. I've examined hundreds of 19th century French estate documents. That drawing was wrong. Too clean, too precise, too convenient. It looked exactly like what someone would create if they wanted to guide excavators to a specific location. You suspected forgery. I suspected manipulation. So I went to the French archives and researched the actual estate records, production logs, inventory ledgers, correspondence, and I found something interesting. There's no record of the 1857 vintage being stored in any hidden cellar. In fact, the estate's production logs show that entire vintage was sold in 1858. None of it was retained for aging. Yet the bottles exist. Yes, which means one of two things. Either the production logs are wrong, or these bottles came from somewhere else and were planted for the Countess to discover. Wolfe was silent for a long moment. Why would anyone do that? That's what I couldn't figure out. The bottles are genuine. I'm certain of that. The wine is exactly what it claims to be. But someone went to extraordinary trouble to create a discovery scenario. They forged the architectural drawing, planted the bottles in the ruins, and made sure the Countess found them exactly where the forged document said they'd be. And you shared this discovery with Mr. Fontaine. Yes. On February 27th, I showed him my research photocopies of the production logs, analysis of the architectural drawing, timeline discrepancies. Gerard was devastated. He'd authenticated the wines as genuine, which they are, but based partly on fraudulent provenance documentation. His reputation was at stake. So you paid him to recant? No. Ashford's voice rose. I offered him money to stay quiet while we investigated further. I didn't want him to retract publicly and destroy the Countess's reputation based on partial evidence. I wanted time to understand what was really happening. But Gerard refused. He said if the documentation was fraudulent, he had to retract immediately regardless of the consequences. He was that kind of man, absolutely principled. Yet you gave him $25,000 as payment for his time and cooperation while I continued investigating. I wanted him to wait before going public. He took the money, but he said he couldn't stay silent. He was going to explain everything the next day. The genuine wines, the forged documents, the mysterious circumstances. He wanted the truth exposed completely. And that night he died. Yes. Ashford's voice was hollow. I didn't kill him, Mr. Wolfe. I met him at 10 p.m. as planned. We discussed what to do, how to expose the fraud without destroying innocent people's reputations. He was alive and well when I left at 11. Someone else must have poisoned him afterward. How convenient for your narrative. It's the truth. Wolfe studied him for a long moment. Dr. Ashford, if you did not kill Mr. Fontaine, who did? And why? I don't know who, but I know why. Someone wanted Gerard silenced before he could explain that the wines are genuine, despite the fraudulent provenance. Think about it. If Gerard had simply retracted and died, everyone would assume the wines were forgeries, and his disgrace drove him to suicide. Case closed, wines discredited. But if Gerard lived to explain the full complexity, genuine wines, manipulated discovery, mysterious conspirators, the investigation would continue. Someone couldn't allow that. Who benefits from keeping the wine's authenticity ambiguous? That's what I've been trying to figure out. The Countess loses everything. She looks like a fraud. Pembroke loses $2 million. The auction house's reputation is damaged. Nobody wins. Unless, Wolfe said slowly, someone plans to acquire the wines after their value is destroyed by doubt. Purchase them cheaply from Mr. Pembroke, who will be desperate to recover some portion of his investment. Ashford stared at him. But who has $2 million to gamble on a scheme this elaborate? An excellent question. One more. Who knew you were investigating the provenance? Who knew you'd discovered the forged documentation? Only Gerard. And Ashford stopped. And whoever forged the documents in the first place. If they were monitoring the situation, watching to see if anyone questioned the provenance, they would have known when I started investigating. They would have known when I showed Gerard my research. They would have known when I showed Gerard my research. They would have known when I showed Gerard my research. They would have known when I showed Gerard my research. That Mr. Fontaine had to be silenced before explaining, Wolfe finished. Someone has been watching this case develop, Dr. Ashford. Someone with resources to forge historical documents, plant genuine wine in French ruins, monitor investigators, and commit murder when necessary. That someone is not you. Then who? Before Wolfe could answer, the phone rang. I picked up. Nero Wolfe's office. Goodwin. Saul's voice urgent. I've been tracking financial records like you asked. I found something. The escrow account that paid Fontaine his initial authentication fee. It was funded by the auction house, yes, but the auction house was reimbursed by a corporation called Bone Heritage Trust, registered in Delaware. I traced ownership through 3 shell companies. The trust is controlled by a single individual. Who? Lawrence Pembroke. The office went completely silent. I looked at Wolfe, then at Ashford, then at the 12 bottles of wine sitting on the desk like innocent witnesses to conspiracy. Pembroke owns the trust that funded Fontaine's authentication. Yes, and there's more. Bone Heritage Trust purchased the French farmland where the cellar was located in June 2019, 6 months before the Countess started her excavation. They sold it to her in December 2019, at a modest profit. Pembroke owned the property where the bottles were discovered. I hung up slowly. Wolfe was leaning back in his chair, his expression satisfied. Well, he said, that explains a great deal. Ashford looked confused. I don't understand. Lawrence Pembroke orchestrated this entire affair, Wolfe said. He purchased the French property where the de Bourbon-Vendôme estate once stood. He planted 12 bottles of genuine pre-phylloxera Burgundy, acquired from some other source in the ruins. He forged the architectural drawing showing the hidden cellar location. He arranged for this documentation to reach the Countess, knowing her family history would make her desperate to excavate. He controlled the auction house indirectly through his trust, ensuring the wines would be properly authenticated and sold publicly. And then he bought them himself for $2 million. But why? I said. He spent $2 million buying wines he already owned. No. He spent $2 million establishing their value and authenticity through public sale. Gerard Fontaine authenticated them. The auction house vouched for them. High-profile collectors bid on them. Their provenance and quality were confirmed by experts. Pembroke now owns 12 bottles of wine with ironclad documentation of their value. Ashford's face went pale. Insurance fraud. Wolfe nodded. Precisely. Mr. Pembroke will insure the wines for their authenticated auction value, $2 million, perhaps more. Then he will arrange for them to be stolen or destroyed. The insurance company will pay the full amount, and Mr. Pembroke will profit handsomely. He might even claim they were forgeries after all, making the insurance company even more eager to settle quickly and avoid controversy. But Gerard discovered the fraud. I said, not the fraud, the manipulation. Dr. Ashford showed Mr. Fontaine evidence that the provenance was partially fabricated. Mr. Fontaine recognized what that meant. Someone had planted the bottles deliberately. If that became public knowledge, the insurance scheme would fail, so Mr. Pembroke murdered him. Kramer stepped into the doorway, Stebbins behind him. We heard everything. Pembroke's at his residence. As far as we know, I said. Then we're going to have a conversation with him. Ashford, you're coming too. We'll need your testimony about the forged documents. Ashford stood shakily. I didn't kill Gerard. We'll sort that out at the station. But if your story checks out, you're a witness, not a suspect. Kramer looked at Wolfe. This better be right. If Pembroke didn't do it, I'm charging you with obstruction. It is right, Wolfe said calmly. Mr. Pembroke is clever, ruthless and greedy. He saw an opportunity to profit through manipulation and murder. He will deny everything, of course, but examine his finances thoroughly. You'll find evidence of the shell companies, the property purchases, the insurance policies. He cannot have hidden all of it. Kramer and Stebbins left with Ashford. Through the office window, I watched them descend the stoop and climb into the police car. The dogs had maintained their positions throughout. Caesar near Wolfe's desk, Mars and Apollo by the door, Minerva and Diana in the front room. Loyal had stayed close to me, sensing tension. After they left, I said, "You think Pembroke will confess?" "No. He will hire expensive lawyers and deny everything. But Dr. Ashford's testimony, combined with financial evidence, will be sufficient for prosecution." Mr. Pembroke made a fatal error. He assumed Mr. Fontaine's death would close the investigation. Instead, it opened one. What about the Countess? Innocent. She was manipulated. Her family's history and financial desperation made her an ideal target. Mr. Pembroke knew she would authenticate the wines enthusiastically, never suspecting they'd been planted for her to discover. And the wines themselves. Genuine. That's the elegant part of Mr. Pembroke's scheme. He used real pre-phylloxera Burgundy, probably acquired piecemeal over years from various sources. The wine is authentic. The bottles are authentic. Even the auction was authentic. Only the discovery story was fabricated. That made the fraud extraordinarily difficult to detect. I looked at the 12 bottles. What happens to them now? Evidence. The courts will decide their eventual disposition, but their value is now thoroughly uncertain. Are they priceless historical artifacts or props in an insurance fraud? The ambiguity Mr. Pembroke created to profit from will now work against him. The phone rang. I picked up. Nero Wolfe's office. Goodwin, the Countess's voice, strained. I just heard from Inspector Kramer. He says Lawrence Pembroke may have orchestrated everything, that my discovery was manipulated. Is it true? Yes. Silence. Then my family's honor, the wines I believed were my ancestors' legacy. All of it was a performance arranged by that man? The wines are genuine, Countess. That part wasn't faked. But yes, Pembroke planted them for you to discover. He used your family history against you. Her voice when she spoke again was cold steel. I want to testify against him. Whatever he's done, I want him prosecuted to the fullest extent. Inspector Kramer will need your cooperation. And Countess, you're not at fault here. You were the victim of an elaborate con by a ruthless man. There's no shame in that. Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. Please tell Mr. Wolfe he has earned his fee twice over. She hung up. Wolfe had opened his book and was reading. His signal that the case was essentially concluded, and he was returning to more interesting pursuits. But I knew better. He'd spend the rest of the day thinking about the case, analyzing what we'd learned, filing away details for future reference. Wolfe's mind never truly stopped working. At 6 p.m., he descended from the plant rooms, and we had dinner. Fritz's roasted chicken with rosemary and garlic, preceded by onion soup. We ate in comfortable silence, while the dogs maintained their positions throughout the brownstone. Over coffee, Wolfe said, "An elegant crime, ruined by overconfidence." Mr. Pembroke should have allowed Mr. Fontaine's retraction to stand unchallenged. The controversy alone would have served his purposes, but he feared explanation, feared exposure, and committed murder. Pride precedes destruction, as the proverb says. Will Kramer get enough evidence to convict? Financial records, Dr. Ashford's testimony, forensic analysis of the forged documents, the French property transfers. Yes, I believe so. Mr. Pembroke underestimated the complexity of covering his tracks. He was clever but not careful. The phone rang. Kramer. Wolfe? We've arrested Pembroke. Found arsenic in his apartment. Same type that killed Fontaine. He claims it's for killing rats, but we both know better. Ashford's story checks out. The man's a witness, not a killer. We're charging Pembroke with murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. You were right. Naturally. Don't get smug. This is a mess of a case, and it'll take months to untangle all the financial evidence, but we've got him. Then justice will be served, Inspector. Eventually, Kramer hung up without further pleasantries. Wolfe returned to his book. I finished my coffee and headed upstairs, tired but satisfied. Another case solved, another murderer caught, another demonstration that Nero Wolfe's brain was the most formidable weapon in detective work. The brownstone settled into its evening routine. Dogs patrolling, Fritz cleaning up, Wolfe reading, the city outside unaware that justice had been served in a comfortable office with bulletproof windows and a man who refused to leave his chair. Some things, I thought, never changed. And thank God for that.